Hey, everyone! If you enjoy my quantum audiobooks, you can support me by becoming a Patreon member. Your support helps me keep creating, and you'll get exclusive perks. You can also access my audiobooks directly through Google Drive. Check out the link in the description. Now, let's get started.
When he went to look for Shen Fei, her research had already come to an end. Upon seeing his arrival, Shen Fei glanced indifferently at Cheng Tian behind Jiang Ming and the trainer with Cheng Tian. Because he was bringing these two people to obtain Hoopa's power, Jiang Ming naturally told Shen Fei about it beforehand. Having known about the incident beforehand, Shen Fei went directly to Cheng Tian's side and looked around. Just as Cheng Tian was getting a little nervous because of Shen Fei's hesitation, Shen Fei, who had been looking around at Cheng Tian, smiled and led him towards the research plate. Jiang Ming, who wasn't particularly interested in Hoopa's power but was only looking for a power for Shen Fei to study, hesitated for a moment as he watched the two walking towards the research lab one after the other but still followed them inside. As soon as Jiang Ming entered, he felt a sense of oppression. Then a rather large-looking elf appeared in front of him. When Jiang Ming first saw the elf, he thought Shen Fei was doing some kind of special research. However, Jiang Ming's feeling didn't last long. Just as he was staring at the elf, Shen raised his hand and introduced it. This spirit is the one you mentioned that was created by replicating the power of Hoopa. Jiang Ming's eyes widened in disbelief that Shen Fei had managed to replicate Hoopa's power in such a short time. Just as surprised as Jiang Ming, Cheng Tian was also naturally surprised. They truly did not expect that when they saw that power again, it was no longer in a box but had transformed into a living elf. Although this elf is different from the elves outside and seems to have little thought, it is still impressive enough. Feeling shocked, Cheng Tian hesitated before approaching Hoopa. Shen Fei also walked up to Hoopa, looked around, and then said to Cheng Tian with a bit of helplessness, "Strictly speaking, this spirit is just a replica of an energy entity, unlike other normal spirits, so you can't touch it. But you can communicate with this spirit. I understand that this spirit seems to be able to communicate in human language." As he spoke, Shen picked up another notebook from the side. Jiang Ming knew about this notebook. Shen Fei often used it to record experimental data. Upon seeing Shen Fei take out the notebook, Jiang Ming, who was initially a little surprised, casually found a place to sit down. Jiang Ming soon learned about the replica energy body from Shen Fei, requesting flowers. The replica Hoopa possesses some of the abilities of the previous Hoopa, but these abilities are mostly weakened. However, this spirit has one very strong ability: it can grant other people's wishes. This is why Shen Fei specifically showed the replicated energy body Hoopa to Cheng Tianmian. Knowing that Cheng Tian intended to find her friend, Shen Fei was willing to give Cheng Tian the benefit of making a wish upon Hoopa. Cheng Tian, who hadn't yet understood why Shen Fei was showing them this side of herself, fell silent upon hearing this. Just when Jiang Ming thought Cheng Tian was a little unhappy because of Shen Fei's behavior, Cheng Tian, who had been silent for a while, nodded to Shen Fei and then spoke excitedly. "Thank you. If I survive and bring my friend back, I will repay your kindness in the future." Both Shen Fei and Jiang Ming had heard this kind of talk countless times, since almost everyone in their family had the ability to help others. Those who have been helped by them will naturally express their gratitude, and most of them will offer a very good promise, just like Cheng Tian did. Having heard most of what was said, he nodded casually. Cheng Tian was unaware of Shen Fei's situation. Seeing that Shen Fei nodded, he stopped talking and began to solemnly make wishes to the Hoopa in front of him, following the requests Shen Fei had made. Hoopa, who had been calm, slowly opened her eyes as Cheng Tian made his wish and looked at him calmly. Just as Jiang Ming was thinking, Cheng Tian, who was standing next to Jiang Ming, suddenly changed his expression and excitedly led his trainer to run directly towards the unfamiliar man. Cheng Tian, who had been awkwardly smiling, suddenly looked towards Shen Fei. While dealing with what he was doing, he spoke to Cheng Tian beside him. Having just received a reply, Cheng Tian was startled when he saw Hoopa suddenly disappear and immediately looked towards Shen Fei. Just as Shen Fei said, Hupako 850 can communicate with humans in human language. Just when Cheng Tian thought his wish might not come true, Hoopa suddenly closed his eyes. Although his current strength is not as good as Shen Fei's, if something really goes wrong, he can help Shen Fei hold off the enemy for a while, giving her more time to deal with the opponent. Hoopa, who could communicate with humans, spoke calmly, "Okay." After all, although they have been vying for this power, only Shen Fei has been able to replicate it in its current form. Jiang Ming, who was a little nervous, suddenly relaxed and frowned slightly as he approached the strange man who had suddenly appeared. While Cheng Tian was still hesitating and thinking, the matter of Shen Fei's power disappearing was relatively peaceful. Seeing the surprised look on Cheng Tian's face, Shen Fei smiled helplessly. Before long, Cheng Tian brought the man back, but when he was brought back, the man's eyes were closed and he was obviously unconscious. Seeing his friend like this, he clearly had no idea what was wrong with him. Cheng Tian shook his head. This was a strange man. As soon as Jiang Ming saw the man, he quickly came to Shen Fei's side and blocked her way. Just then, Hoopa suddenly disappeared. Cheng Tian clenched his fist excitedly. He really didn't expect that he could actually make a wish to Hoopa and even get Hoopa's consent. Aside from fighting and killing, he really doesn't seem to know anything. He looked at Shen Fei somewhat awkwardly. After all, Shen Fei's ability to transform a force into what it was now was enough to prove her strength. Then a man appeared in midair. A deep, resonant voice rang out at that moment. Cheng Tian, who had initially felt a little guilty, realized what was happening after hearing this and gave an awkward smile. That's normal. That power can't be used continuously, it can only be used once. Once it grants your wish, the power has been used. At the same time, Shen also quickly took a few steps back. My research can't continue. That force can only support me to this point. To continue, I need more power. Only after hearing this did Cheng Tian understand why this force had suddenly disappeared. Just then, the air suddenly distorted. In this situation, if he didn't use these things, Shen Fei might have learned more good things from them. Is he currently unconscious? He stared nervously at Hoopa in front of him. Jiang Ming, who initially thought the other party was likely an enemy attacker, looked at the way Cheng Tian brought him over and then at the other party's unconscious state. He quickly realized that this was because Hu Pa had agreed to Cheng Tian's wish and had fulfilled it for Cheng Tian. It's a real waste that he used it so casually. As a trainer who only knew how to fight and kill, Cheng Tian knew clearly that they really didn't have the knowledge that Shen Fei possessed. Unlike Cheng Tian, who was somewhat insecure because he knew he lacked the necessary knowledge, Shen Fei seemed to have already anticipated this outcome. Unsure, Cheng Tian looked around before finally fixing his gaze on Shen Fei. Shen Fei, clearly sensing Cheng Tian's plea for help, came to Cheng Tian's side somewhat speechlessly and checked on the man. Because she's not a medical student, Shen Fei can't treat people, but she can still check on their condition. With Shen Fei's confirmation, Cheng Tian, who was initially nervous, quickly heard Shen Fei's response. His physical condition doesn't seem to be too serious, he's probably just unconscious. Let's take him to the hospital for treatment. Shen Fei's words gave Cheng Tian a greater sense of security. Originally worried that something had happened to his friend, Cheng Tian excitedly nodded repeatedly to Shen Fei before leaving with his friend. Jiang Ming glanced at Cheng Tian, who was leaving in a hurry, and then smiled as he came to Shen Fei's side and began to ask about the situation of Hu Pa's power. Although Shen Fei was very gentle with many people, Jiang Ming knew better than anyone what to say and what not to say. Therefore, Shen Fei may not have told Cheng Tian everything. As it turned out, Jiang Ming's guess was indeed correct. Seeing Jiang Ming walk over with a hesitant look on his face, Shen Fei immediately smiled and sat down next to him. You are even more perceptive than they are. We're family. If I'm not perceptive enough towards you, it just means I don't care about you enough. Shen Fei chuckled, clearly satisfied with Jiang Ming's sweet talk. Furthermore, since there was no need to hide anything from her own child, Shen Fei, somewhat satisfied, quickly took the data and began to seriously discuss Hoopa's situation. In fact, many legendary mythical beasts and mythical creatures have appeared in their world. That's why a problem arose, though it wasn't a major one. However, Shen Fei deliberately concealed half of the problem because Hubo was a rather unstable elf. The Pokémon that appeared in their world before and then disappeared, while not all of them were good Pokémon, were not actually that dangerous. After all, the other party wouldn't recklessly harm ordinary humans. They would only focus on doing their own thing. Unlike those elves who are single-mindedly focused on doing their own thing and won't cause any major problems as long as they don't provoke others, Hoopa is a free-spirited and very docile elf. This elf can be used by humans, deceived and driven by them, but at the same time, this elf is extremely arrogant and may go back on its word and attack humans at any time. During Shen Fei's research, she actually chatted with Hoopa, who was replicated using her power for a while. During the conversation, Shen Fei discovered that Hoopa was indeed in a state of complete chaos. There is no clear distinction between good and bad, like and dislike. Such a Pokémon is clearly dangerous to the world today, which is the fundamental reason why Shen Fei is unwilling to let other trainers learn about Hoopa's many new aspects. No matter how powerful or unique Hoopa's fighting strength is, this Pokémon should not appear in the world so casually. Jiang Ming, who had learned about the situation from Shen Fei, nodded solemnly to her, understanding what she meant. After confirming that Shen Fei 980 did not want Hoopa to appear in the public eye, Jiang Ming spoke up directly. If any trainers come to me, I will tell them that the power has disappeared on its own. Shenhua glanced at him with a smile, and Jiang Ming nodded in agreement. Then she warmly came to Jiang Ming's side, intending to tell him about what had happened recently. The mother and son talked in this space for a while. It wasn't until evening that Jiang Ming hurriedly returned to the hospital with the elf. As soon as he returned, Cheng Tian brought his researcher friend to Jiang Ming and spoke to Jiang Ming with great excitement. "My good friend knows that you saved him, so he wanted to come and thank you." A few minutes later, Jiang Ming saw a noisy crowd at the hospital entrance and Nido King standing there menacingly. Seeing that Jiang Ming was already there, the nurse breathed a sigh of relief and then spoke seriously. However, he didn't say anything in the end and just hurriedly headed towards Nidoking's direction with Gardevoir and Jengar. However, after a while, Jiang Ming quickly got rid of his unease because he understood more from the stranger's words of gratitude. He wanted to meet Shen. "My mother can see you, but not now." Jiang Ming smiled with satisfaction, having determined that he was smart enough not to cause trouble, and then quickly told Shen Fei about the incident. This is why he tried every means to establish a connection with Shen Fei. Upon understanding his thoughts as a man, Jiang Ming immediately looked at him seriously. Jiang Ming was still bewildered by Cheng Tian's sudden words. Completely surprised that he hadn't even seen the recovered Nidoking before hearing the news that Nidoking had beaten up the trainer, Jiang Ming smirked, unsure how to comment on the matter. Jiang Ming felt a little uncomfortable at being unexpectedly thanked like this. It seems that this Nidoking he acquired is quite a troublemaker. After hesitating for a moment, Jiang Ming finally took out his phone and decided to call Shen Fei to tell her about what had happened. Shen Fei had some things to deal with and didn't have much time to meet this person, but she could clearly understand what Jiang Ming was saying, and she was indeed very interested in this researcher who was able to swindle a force from Hoopa. Jiang Ming's eyelids twitched, already aware of Nidoking's ability to cause trouble. Upon learning that Shen Fei was willing to meet, Jiang Ming chuckled, casually hung up the phone and then spoke seriously to the person in front of him. The other party was not stupid and naturally could see why Jiang Ming was so serious. He looked around seriously and just then, 10 nurses walked in. Upon hearing Jiang Ming's willingness to meet, the man happily led Cheng Tian away from there. It's obvious that the other party doesn't necessarily need to see Danfei right now. Your Pokémon just recovered today and then attacked a trainer downstairs. You should go and handle this matter. The other party's real intention was not to thank him at all but to ask him for a favor. Hearing this, Jiang Ming hesitated for a moment, but naturally he wouldn't do anything malicious to him because of this. However, Jiang Ming wouldn't agree so easily. The other party did not require Jiang Ming to take him to see Shen Fei, so seeing Jiang Ming on the phone, the stranger quickly breathed a sigh of relief and obediently waited by. He looked around awkwardly, then spoke to Jiang Ming with a hint of helplessness. Meanwhile, the stranger next to Cheng Tian excitedly approached Jiang Ming and thanked him repeatedly. This interest led Shen Fei to decide to meet this stranger, but not now. After the two left, Jiang Ming hurriedly went to the bedside. Actually, I had tried to study Hoopa's power before, but no matter how I studied it, I couldn't establish a connection with Hoopa. But as soon as Jiang Ming walked over, he realized that there was no familiar elf on the hospital bed. This time, Shen Fei's approach was clearly the result of his long-term research that he had been unable to figure out. Standing next to Nidoking is an injured trainer. You don't need to worry that I'm here to ask you for that power. I know I don't have that ability. I know we're not that close, but if you can really help me accomplish something this time, the reward will definitely be substantial. Previously, in the secret realm, Nidoking really wanted to take action against this person, but due to his injury, his ability to do so was ultimately weakened. It was clear that he agreed to talk about it again tomorrow. Seeing that Jiang Ming seemed to be still figuring out what had happened, he smiled wryly and spread his hands at Jiang Ming. After being coaxed for a while, he quickly gave a satisfied hum. As soon as they got back, before Jiang Ming could even reprimand Nidoking, Nidoking was already staring intently at Gardevoir beside Jiang Ming. Unlike the noisy crowd who felt Nidoking was dangerous because of some of its actions, that trainer didn't seem to feel that Nidoking was particularly dangerous. After saying this, he hurriedly took out a map, wanting to have a heart-to-heart talk with Jiang Ming. Seeing that the trainer agreed with his statement, Jiang Ming smiled with satisfaction, waved to him, and quickly returned to the ward with Nidoking. I am the trainer who destroyed its nest. This matter didn't seem particularly urgent. Hearing Jiang Ming say this, the trainer, who had originally planned to have a good talk with Jiang Ming, hesitated for a moment and finally put away the map in his hand. Considering that the thing in his hand was already gone, Jiang Ming had no intention of getting entangled with other trainers at this time. Jiang Ming, who had no idea what had happened, raised an eyebrow and looked straight ahead. Jiang Ming, who fully understood Nidoking's decision to switch trainers, glanced sympathetically at the trainer in front of him. Can we talk again tomorrow? He needs a good rest. Just as Jiang Ming was thinking, the trainer saw Jiang Ming hurriedly trying to leave with Nidoking and quickly caught up with him, speaking somewhat nervously. Unfortunately, Jiang Ming doesn't want to deal with it right now because he has just finished dealing with the matter concerning that force and doesn't want to deal with a second matter. After all, he had nothing to give back to the other party and he didn't intend to give anything in return. He could roughly tell why Nidoking had attacked him, so seeing the people around him still whispering amongst themselves, he covered his wounds and obediently began to coax Nidoking. After all, elves don't weigh pros and cons like humans do, they only think of the enemy and rush in to cover for them. CCFC. Clearly, the trainer knew that his relationship with Jiang Ming wasn't that good. Seeing the puzzled look on Jiang Ming's face, the trainer gave an awkward smile. Then, it very forcefully issued a battle challenge to Gardevoir. At the same time, the man who had just been coaxing Nidoran also hurriedly arrived. Just then, Nidoking saw Jiang Ming snort and ran straight towards him. Jiang Ming then seriously turned around and ran away with Nidoking. After all, although he sympathized with Shen, he still knew why this trainer had come here. Jiang Ming, who needed a good rest, calmly glanced at the trainer in front of him. Just as the trainer was about to speak, Jiang Ming waved his hand helplessly. Jiang Ming didn't speak, he just looked at him calmly. Although Nidoran has a bad temper, he seems to be quite easy to coax. The trainer, feeling a headache coming on as Jiang Ming calmly looked at him, scratched his head before speaking seriously to Jiang Ming. This was somewhat unexpected for Jiang Ming, as he remembered that his relationship with this trainer didn't seem to be that good. Now Jiang Ming understood why King Nido had done such a thing, but things are different now. Nidoking has fully recovered from his injuries, so it's normal for him to rush at his enemy when he sees him again. We've come here to ask you for a favor. Sano. Gardevoir shook its head, clearly having no intention of fighting Nidoking. After all, Nidoking is no longer a wild Pokémon but a Pokémon tamed by Jiang Ming. If Gardevoir accepts Nidoking's challenge at this time and injures Nidoking again, then Jiang Ming will be in trouble. Gardevoir has some very important things to take care of, so I won't be able to fight alongside you. It turns out that Shen Fei had a new job to start recently. Seeing that Nidoking was about to take action because of his displeasure, Jiang Ming quickly stopped Nidoking from doing so. Then he looked seriously at Gardevoir beside him, just about to tell Gardevoir that if all else failed he could accept Nidoking's challenge. Shen Fei was extremely busy during that period, and Gardevoir happened to be somewhat helpful in this job. Shen Fei, who was extremely busy, naturally wanted to take some time to relax, so she naturally wanted Gardevoir to go back and help. Once Jiang Ming agreed, Shen Fei quickly told him about her new job position. Jiang Ming didn't actually intend for Gardevoir to stay by his side. It is exceptionally reliable when it comes to normal tasks that need to be handled. Jiang Ming smiled and looked at the jumping Nidoking without any intention of coaxing him. The main problem is that it doesn't seem to make much of a difference since no one here can understand what Nidoking is saying. Gardevoir is my mom's Pokémon and it's likely to keep appearing. If you really want to have a serious battle with Gardevoir, then I suggest you focus on leveling up your Pokémon now. Then, quite ruthlessly, they took Gardevoir directly to the place Shen Fei had mentioned. Instead, it dealt Nidoran another heavy blow. Seeing that Nido King Jiang Ming was unhappy because talking to him was useless, but he was also upset, he smiled and comforted him. Shauna stayed by his side to protect him, but now he no longer needs that protection. Jiang Ming, unaware of why Shen Fei had specifically called, answered the phone with a puzzled expression. Jiang Ming glanced at the screen and realized that it was Shen Fei who had called. These words were jarring to King Nido, even though they were true. Upon learning Shen Fei's location, Jiang Ming quickly hung up the phone and immediately spoke to Nidoking, who was still throwing a tantrum. Unfortunately, Nidoking has only been tamed for a short time, so it's impossible for it to treat Jiang Ming well and obey him obediently like other Pokémon. Upon seeing Jiang Ming's arrival, the man took Gardevoir away without saying a word, showing that Shen Fei's matter was very urgent and she was very busy. As soon as the call connected, Shen Fei expressed her desire to bring Gardevoir back. Even if you challenge Gardevoir now, you still can't beat it. Jiang Ming could understand Gardevoir's concerns, so he shook his head at Nidoking as well. Seeing Jiang Ming shake his head, Nidoking was clearly very unhappy with Jiang Ming's decision. Jiang Ming, who didn't intend to get involved in Shen Fei's affairs, stood outside for a while before quickly leaving and returning to the hospital. But no matter how true it was, King Nidoran still got a little angry because of that statement. Since no guarantee was needed, Jiang Ming readily agreed to Shen Fei's request without hesitation. Shen Fei had already arranged for someone to wait outside to pick up Gardevoir. Upon returning, Jiang Ming smiled as he dealt with Nidoking's discharge from the hospital, noticing that Nidoking was still somewhat unhappy about Gardevoir's departure. The exceptionally reliable Nidoking was clearly still unhappy that Gardevoir couldn't accept his challenge but ultimately said nothing. While Nidoking is often temperamental, it's clear from previous collaborations in the Rift that he only acts this way during his less busy periods. Unless it's something particularly dangerous, Jiang Ming generally prefers to train his own Pokémon. Just then, the cell phone rang suddenly. This isn't a very pleasant thing to say, but Nidoking is clearly a Pokémon that listens to advice. Thinking of how Gardevoir had outmaneuvered them in the secret realm Nido Dynasty, who had originally been determined to have a good match with Gardevoir, hesitated. Then, with great reluctance, she came to Jiang Ming's side and showed her willingness to train properly. For Jiang Ming, it was certainly a good thing that his Pokémon was willing to train properly. After happily finishing all the things related to his discharge from the hospital, he took Nidoking and planned to go for training. Just then, Jengar, who was following Jiang Ming, suddenly floated over, glanced at Nidoking next to Jiang Ming, and then pointed to the location where Jiang Hongmen was. Although Jengar didn't speak, Jiang Mingshu clearly knew what Jengar was planning to do from its actions. Following Gardevoir's departure, Jengar also chose to leave. However, compared to Gardevoir's situation, which is more urgent, Jengar clearly just wants to return to its trainer since Jiang Ming doesn't have anything else to deal with. Although she had a fairly close relationship with Jiang Ming, it was ultimately not as good as her own trainer. Since there's nothing else to deal with, Jengar naturally doesn't need to stay with someone who isn't its trainer. Jiang Ming didn't really need Jengar anymore, so after looking at Jengar's action for a moment, he decided to take a picture. Without wasting words, Jiang Ming quickly retrieved Nidoking into its Pokéball and headed towards Jiang Hongmen's location with Jengar. Seeing Jiang Ming's decisive action, Jengar was clearly quite satisfied and waved his hand at Jiang Ming triumphantly, seemingly eager to have a conversation with him. Unfortunately, Jiang Ming really couldn't communicate with Jengar. In the end, the two sides could only arrive at Jiang Hongmin's location in this silent environment. Jiang Hongmin has clearly not needed Jengar to see Jiang Ming's arrival lately, which has left him somewhat puzzled. Jiang Ming nudged Jengar, looked at Jiang Hongmin, who was full of doubt, and casually spoke. Next, I plan to take my Pokémon to train for a while. It seems like something new has come up to me, and I might not be able to take care of Jengar after that, so I'm sending Jengar back first. Upon receiving this news from Jiang Ming, Jiang Hongmin nodded casually. He had always approved of Jiang Ming's methods, so he wouldn't question Jiang Ming's actions further. Upon learning that Jiang Ming was going to undergo new training and attend to other matters, he recalled Jengar without saying a word. Having confirmed that Jiang Hongmin was all right, Jiang Ming prepared to leave with the elf, but before leaving, he hesitated and reminded Jiang Hongmin of something. Gardevoir was just taken back. They said there's something urgent that needs Gardevoir's help. Maybe you can go and help them relax a bit. It seemed that Jiang Ming hadn't expected him to bring up such a thing, but Jiang Hongmin clearly knew what Shen Fei was doing. He thought about it for a moment, then nodded seriously and said that Jiang Ming didn't need to worry about Shen Fei's affairs and that he would help deal with any problems that might arise. Having learned that Jiang Hongmin would help with the matter, Jiang Ming didn't plan to waste any more time. After confirming everything, he left with a group of elves. This time, Jiang Ming went straight to the trainer who had been beaten up by Nidoking at the hospital entrance in 3.6. After all, he hadn't forgotten that the trainer actually wanted to tell him something. At that time, Jiang Ji didn't really want to deal with the matter, so he chose to ask the trainer to keep quiet for the time being. Now that he's almost finished with everything and has some free time, he can finally have a proper chat about what that trainer wanted to say and all the good things he mentioned before. The trainer that Jiang Ming found seemed genuinely interested in inviting Jiang Ming to join them. Seeing that Jiang Ming was finally interested, he happily took out a map and pointed to a small dot near the Dongting Lake's secret realm. Seeing that small piece of land, Jiang Ming felt a little lost. Jiang Ming didn't know what exactly was near the Dongting Lake's secret realm, but if there really were some good things there, he shouldn't have been unaware of them when he went there. Just as Jiang Ming was looking completely bewildered, the trainer pointing at the map spoke up excitedly. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Huo Ting, and I am one of the 22 people who are passionate about studying various mythical beasts and spirits. That's quite a coincidence. It was only during this time that Jiang Ming learned that there really were mythical beasts or divine spirits in the world. However, he didn't expect that by the time he learned about it recently, there were already trainers researching these Pokémon. It seems we should never underestimate human exploration. Although it seems like a coincidence, it doesn't mean Jiang Mingbian will trust the job trainer. He looked at the trainer named Houghton, his expression calm, and said nothing. Huo Ting clearly knew that Jiang Ming wouldn't believe him so easily, so seeing Jiang Ming's calm expression, he didn't say much. Instead, he started rambling on about his recent discoveries, taking out his map. When you mentioned Hoopa and Celebi before, I went to learn about some things in this area. I just discovered the researchers who work on those two Pokémon. The difference in opinion is that I think the final destination of those two Pokémon is this small island near Dongting Lake. When it came to the island, Houghton was clearly very enthusiastic, and he began to ramble on about his discovery of it. Jiang Ming was not a person without judgment. He stood quietly to the side and listened to Huo Ting's account. It was clear that Huo Ting had a lot of evidence for these judgments. Because there is a basis for this, if he is willing to go with Houghton, then perhaps he really can discover something. Whether or not we'll encounter any special spirits is another matter, but there's a good chance there are some really good things on that island. Besides getting some great items, Jiang Ming can also train his Pokémon on the island. Because it is said to be a small island that is not managed by anyone. Because it's unmanaged, some of the more aggressive trainers naturally choose that place. If Jiang Ming goes there, the enemies he faces may be quite fierce, but at the same time he can use these fierce enemies to train his Pokémon. After thinking about the training plan for a while, Jiang Ming finally agreed amidst Huo Ting's intense sales pitch. Having received Jiang Ming's consent, Huo Ting nodded excitedly and then quickly began to recount the information he had gathered. Just as he was speaking, a series of noises suddenly came from behind him. Then, several trainers following behind Houghton approached him with embarrassed expressions. "It seems our team was ambushed by a Squirtle." Huo Ting, who was chatting happily, froze for a moment, looking at the trainer with a blank expression, clearly not understanding what the other person meant. The trainer knew that what he said would confuse Houghton, but he still pointed somewhat awkwardly in a direction not far away. As the trainer moved, Jiang Ming looked up and saw a Squirtle nimbly dodging left and right among the trainers. Squirtle dodged left and right, and the trainers around it didn't really want to pay attention to this Pokémon. But if they ignored it, the Pokémon would steal things from their bags. Jiang Ming, who was calmly observing the situation from the sidelines, listened to his complaints and was actually quite satisfied with him. "Since you took responsibility for this Pokémon, why abandon it? Although this Squirtle has been causing trouble in the neighborhood lately, giving many trainers a headache, I think the culprit is definitely the trainer who abandoned it." Jiang Ming hadn't seen many of these wild spirits, but he had actually seen them before, so he wasn't surprised. Huo Ting clearly hadn't expected that such a change would occur in his team when he was talking to Jiang Ming about some things. Originally, most Pokémon lived in secret realms and there were few Pokémon to be found in cities. Most Pokémon were with their trainers. Because there are many trainers, the number of trainers who abandon their Pokémon may not be particularly large, but it's not unheard of. Some of the abandoned elves can return to the secret realm they once belonged to, while others are adopted by various organizations. You could say this is a very shameless, thieving Squirtle. Having gained a brief understanding of Huo Ting's actions, Jiang Ming pondered for a moment before glancing at Huo Ting indifferently. Trainers, unwilling to easily discard their more valuable possessions, surrounded Squirtle. After all, some of the ideas that Houghton mentioned are quite similar to his own. People with principles won't betray others easily, so Jiang Ming doesn't need to worry too much about being betrayed afterward. This means that some of the items Squirtle retrieved from those trainers were things he could easily give away, but others were quite valuable and couldn't be easily discarded. Of course, some elves are quite unruly and firmly believe that since they have already been abandoned by humans, they will not choose humans again. Therefore, these elves will become wild elves in the urban wilderness. This at least proves that even if they were to do the same thing in the future, there wouldn't be any major disagreements. Good for them. However, after the initial surprise, the reservation quickly recovered and looked at his team with a speechless expression before turning to look at Jiang Ming, who was curious about the Squirtle in the team. Huo Ting clearly had his own understanding of these things. Seeing that Jiang Ming didn't seem surprised by the appearance of Squirtle, he breathed a sigh of relief and then couldn't help but make a comment. Robber Squirtle also knew that some of the trainers in this group must be very strong in battle. A Pokémon like Squirtle, which has been abandoned and continues to ambush its trainer, is clearly a wild Pokémon that is determined not to associate with humans. At the same time, Jiang Ming could also see that Huo Ting was a person with principles. As a Pokémon, Squirtle can't tell whether something is valuable or not, it just doesn't know if three things are even useful. Most of those wild Pokémon were abandoned by trainers who considered themselves powerful and were unwilling to continue interacting with these weaker Pokémon. You're right, the real culprit is still the trainer who abandoned Squirtle, but I think the most important thing now is to get your teammates' belongings back from Squirtle. However, those trainers were naturally not going to let Squirtle go easily since some of their items were worthless while others were quite valuable. However, due to the increasing number of trainers and the fact that some trainers are not very responsible, traces of wild Pokémon have gradually appeared in the city. So after taking almost everything from these trainers, Squirtle turned around and tried to run away. This is a Squirtle that was abandoned by a trainer some time ago. Seeing Jiang Ming take out Lucario and Squirtle for a duel, he spoke up somewhat awkwardly. After all, just as Houghton said, the real culprit is still Squirtle's trainer. After confirming that Hotting indeed knew the island very well and was aware of any dangers it posed, Jiang Ming quickly finalized with Hotting's plan to travel to the island around the next day. However, just as Chuang Ding was thinking, Jiang Ming suddenly smiled and said to Lucario, "Attack that hole." But Jiang Ming still chose Lucario. If you can't beat that Squirtle 573, it might hide inside its shell and make it impossible for you to attack it. I think the best way is to arrange a Pokémon that can use psychic attacks. Just as Jiang Ming was thinking, Hotting, who had taken out a Pokéball, looked at Jiang Ming, clearly unaware of what he was thinking. Actually, Lucario isn't suitable to fight Squirtle since Squirtle can simply retreat into its shell if it can't win. Their attack on Squirtle is simply because Squirtle is directly affecting the trainers in the vicinity, so they are just warning Squirtle. The Squirtle, which had just retreated into its hole, could never have imagined that Jiang Ming would be so cunning. It soon couldn't take the attack from Lucario and ran out of its shell, squeaking and throwing away the things it had retrieved from the trainers. Lucario, having been thrown out, quickly approached Squirtle and began to battle it. Hu Ting, believing that Jiang Ming's side lacked experience, took out a Pokéball, intending to help Lucario defeat Squirtle at any time. As soon as the items were retrieved, the trainers around returned to the places Squirtle had lost and began diligently searching for their own belongings. As if reminded by Jiang Ming, Hu Ting quickly took out a Pokéball after hearing Jiang Ming's words. He mainly wanted to see if Lucario had any ability to deal with situations involving Squirtle. If Lucario is fast enough, Squirtle definitely won't be able to react immediately and block the hole when Lucario attacks it. As for Pokémon like Lucario, which are somewhat fighting type, they are not really suitable for battling against Pokémon with hard shells. This action didn't last long. A few minutes later, everyone returned to normal and Jiang Ming started listening to what Hu Ting had to say again. It is true that Squirtle can retract into its shell. If Squirtle is inside its shell is quite hard and it is indeed not easy for fighting-type Pokémon to knock it off. However, just as he was about to take out the Pokéball, Jiang Ming had already thrown Lucario out. Not wanting to go too far, Jiang Ming saw Squirtle drop its things and run away, so he immediately recalled Lucario. Since they couldn't attack the shell, they attacked the small hole that was exposed inside the shell. As it turned out, Jiang Ming's guess was absolutely correct. Under Jiang Ming's command, Lucario attacked directly into the cave without hesitation. If you really want to fight Squirtle, you'll need Kirlia. As a student, although I am quite talented in many areas, I still lack experience in many things. Now that things have been mostly resolved, they naturally don't need to go too far. Fu Ting, who thought Jiang Ming's choice this time was a bit wrong, sighed with a headache, thinking to himself that he was still just a student. Seeing that Squirtle had already thrown the thing away, Jiang Ming naturally had no intention of actually harming the poor Pokémon. But that doesn't mean that fighting-type Pokémon can't defeat Squirtle. For Jiang Ming, finalizing the date for tomorrow was actually a bit too fast, since the island he knew about was basically what the reservation had mentioned. Because he doesn't study those lesser-known islands much, he doesn't know much about the situation on that island. If he were to be more cautious, he would actually need to spend more time getting to know the island before going there with Hotting. But Jiang Ming didn't intend to remain calm. For him, what he needed now was a stage to challenge his elves. This way, his spirit can grow better. For better growth, Jiang Lu is taking a risk. Of course, if he fails, Jiang Ming will use the Dongting Lake's secret realm, which is relatively close to the island, as a means of protection. They wouldn't be foolish enough to risk their lives on the island. Having already figured out his plan, Jiang Ming quickly communicated with Ding for a while and then prepared to leave with his elf. However, just as Jiang Ming was about to leave with the elf, Fortin led Jiang Ming enthusiastically toward a nearby house. He then excitedly said, "We've been living around here recently. Since you're willing to come with us tomorrow, it proves you still trust us. Then I think it might be better if you stay here and set off with us tomorrow." Completely surprised that Hu Ting had already rented a house, Jiang Ming looked at Hu Ting with a surprised expression, and then at the house Hu Ting was pointing to. Jiang Ming then smiled and nodded at Hu Ting. Seeing that Jiang Ming believed him so easily, Hu Ting felt a little bald. He had witnessed Jiang Ming's strength in the secret realm of Dongting Lake, which is why he went to great lengths to recruit Jiang Ming. However, he was a little worried after successfully recruiting him. After all, Jiang Ming trusted him too easily. Was what he said true or false? Jiang Ming did not bother to find out. He now hopes that Jiang Ming can stay where he lives, and Jiang Ming actually agreed. This trust made him feel comfortable, but at the same time it made him feel dangerous. After all, an experienced trainer shouldn't be so careless. Jiang Ming's current carelessness makes Fortin think that Jiang Ming might not be experienced enough, and if any problems arise later, Fortin might have to help take responsibility. Just as he was thinking with a slight headache, Jiang Ming suddenly looked behind the group and smiled as he spoke to Huo Ting. That Squirtle didn't leave, it seemed to be secretly following us the whole time. I wonder what it was doing. Huo Ting, who was initially worried that Jiang Ming's side lacked experience, changed his expression upon hearing this and quickly turned to look at the trainers behind him. Please give me flowers. After all, Squirtle's behavior just now was rather thuggish. Who knows if this Pokémon is secretly following them again, intending to steal something again? The little guy is fine, of course. If Squirtle just wants to be fed and warm, they can give him some items and food. 0. However, if Squirtle accidentally steals something important from them, they cannot tolerate it. Just as Hotting was thinking, the Squirtle that was secretly following them from the shadows clearly didn't expect to be discovered so easily. Seeing that Hotting had begun the search, Squirtle was startled and quickly turned and ran away. If Squirtle doesn't run away, it will be quite difficult for Fudding to find the Pokémon, since there are quite a few houses in the area where they live which are good hiding places. With these sheltered houses, Squirtle can easily hide between them. However, because Squirtle ran away, Hotting clearly heard the sound of Squirtle running away. Instantly, he and the other trainers located Squirtle, directly depriving it of its ability to use the house as cover. However, not knowing Zhang Tian's true intentions, Jiang Ming, though sensing something was amiss, didn't intend to act rashly at this moment. Instead, he went to Huo Ting's side, planning to let Huo Ting handle the matter. Unfortunately, no matter how fast he was, he couldn't outrun this sudden attack. Nidoking charged directly towards Ekans at incredible speed. Just as Ekans was trying to dodge, Condor's attack landed on Ekans. Once he was certain that the antidote had temporarily alleviated some of his problems, Hotting immediately took out his Piquet ball and glared fiercely at the Arbok that had suddenly jumped out. He looked at Zhang Tian speechlessly, feeling that this person had already openly become his enemy, yet he still thought he would be foolish enough to trust such words. Compared to Jiang Ming's cautious approach, Huo Ting's approach was clearly more direct. Squirtle, completely unable to dodge, was caught by Hotting in just 1 minute. However, just as Hotting was about to attack Arbok, Jiang Ming stepped in front of Hotting and took out Nidoking. Perhaps surprised by how weak he was, Squirtle hung his head in dejection. Once he was certain the Pokémon was in his hand, Zhang Tian approached Jiang Ming with a beaming smile. Just as Hotting was about to enter the house with Squirtle 980, an Arbok suddenly darted out and launched a venomous sting at Hotting. Arbok, no match for Nidoking, was quickly overwhelmed and unable to fight back. Just as Jiang Ming was somewhat speechless, Zhang Tian spoke up helplessly. I can't say some things right now, but what Shi Zhang said when I came to report to you is absolutely true. Upon hearing Huo Ting's question, Zhang Tian smiled and looked Huo Ting up and down, clearly understanding why Huo Ting had asked such a question. Upon seeing Huo Ting's condition, Jiang Ming, who was not far away, immediately took out an antidote from his own person. Huo Ting, who had been attacked, glared at Zhang Tian and said fiercely, "You brat, you didn't deliberately follow us and attack us, did you?" Jiang Ming didn't speak but just looked at Zhang Tian coldly. He didn't think that Zhang Mo's arrival here was a complete accident. Hotting wasn't a very kind person. Seeing that Squirtle had lowered its head, he coldly led Squirtle towards his rented place. I'm really sorry, this appearance was indeed a bit reckless. Even Huo Ting himself did not expect that an attack would land directly on him. As Arbok's attack was about to land on him, his expression suddenly changed and he tried to dodge. The Arbok trainer hiding behind the scenes seemed to have already guessed this outcome. Seeing that his Pokémon had been defeated, Zhang Tian did not feel angry. Instead, he simply recalled Arbok. The change happened in an instant. The sudden attack was something none of the trainers had anticipated. Jenny Nai Tilda. Huo Ting, who had been attacked, saw Jiang Ming quickly take out the antidote and didn't dare to waste any time. He immediately injected himself with the antidote, but he remained calm, simply approaching Jiang Ming. "I've heard about your next objective, I just want to join you." 112.5. So this attempted dodge was unsuccessful. The object did not fall on him. Jiang Ming sensed that something was off with Zhang Tian when Arbok appeared. When Jiang Ming heard this, he naturally didn't want to believe it. He didn't know what the relationship was between Jiang Ming and Zhang Tian. He only knew that Zhang Tian had suddenly appeared and attacked him with Arbok. Jiang Ming, who was following them and saw their situation, silently glanced at the Squirtle, which wasn't moving much. Squirtle clearly understood what Jiang Ming was saying. Hearing Jiang Ming's words, it finally stopped moving, which had been a little excited. This kind of person is not easy to control and could harm others at any time. They just want to form a team with Jiang Ming to go on an adventure. They don't want such a dangerous person to follow them around just for the sake of adventure. The Squirtle, which was being held by Hotting, seemed to realize that Hotting was seriously injured, so it stopped moving. It seems this elf isn't so mischievous after all. If Squirtle had always looked dangerous in its initial form, Jiang Ming definitely wouldn't have bothered with this Pokémon. Having confirmed that Huo Ting didn't care much about Squirtle, Jiang Ming calmly picked up Squirtle and saw that it was still trying to struggle. Jiang Ming then pointed to a corner not far away. After saying that, Zhang Tian looked at Huo Ting with a serious expression. After confirming that there was no major problem with Huo Ting, he turned around and left, seemingly having some urgent business to attend to. Perhaps not expecting to be discovered so easily, the child cautiously moved closer to Jiang Ming upon seeing his movements, and spoke to him with a fawning expression. After confirming that Squirtle wasn't particularly mischievous, Jiang Ming hesitated for a moment before taking Squirtle from Hotting's hands. Upon being asked by Jiang Ming, the child hesitated for a moment, then pinched the hem of his clothes before nodding firmly. "I am Squirtle's friend." The other trainers following Ridden nodded without hesitation upon hearing this. After all, Zhang Tian had really gone too far. This single move by the other party is enough to prove that they are definitely not someone who can be easily manipulated. As Jiang Ming's movement ended, a small head cautiously poked out from there. A group of trainers who had no intention of letting any dangerous beings accompany them hurriedly came to Hotten's side and took Hotten to the hospital for treatment. "So you've come to ask me for Squirtle." Upon hearing the child's words, Squirtle paused for a moment, then excitedly began gesturing wildly at Jiang Ming. "Don't worry, I have no intention of harming you, nor do I intend to harm this child." Seeing how quickly he came and went, Huo Ting was clearly very unhappy with his demeanor. Unfortunately, Jiang Ming couldn't understand what this gesturing elf was saying. He watched speechlessly as the excited Squirtle twitched several times, so even though Squirtle was very excited, Jiang Ming was helpless. Having confirmed that Squirtle's agitated attitude was due to the child, Jiang Ming breathed a sigh of relief and smiled at the ingratiating child looking at him. However, because this incident happened so suddenly, seeing Jiang Ming's action, all that was left was to use his own understanding. Normally, Hotting would definitely handle the Squirtle matter properly. However, seeing that Squirtle was barely moving and ignoring the Pokémon, Jiang Ming had a new perspective on it. After a while, he finally gave the excited Squirtle a slightly helpless pat. Squirtle didn't do it on purpose. "I can compensate you for any losses you suffer on Squirtle's behalf. I hope you can release Squirtle safely. Even if this kid really is our friend, I can't accept it." It was a child who looked quite cute. It was clear from its gestures that it was related to the child. They came and went in a hurry and even carelessly hurt Hotting. 22. "Then I'll leave the rest to you." In order to avoid losing this advantage, the Japanese trainers were hesitantly discussing whether or not to take control of Jiang Mingli. It is precisely because Jiang Ming's side has no way to crush them that they dare to follow Jiang Ming so recklessly. Since they had partnered with Jiang Ming, they had naturally investigated some things about him. In addition, Jiang Ming was quite high profile, so their investigation revealed quite a lot of information. Even the injured Huo Ting was clearly overjoyed when he heard Jiang Ming's words. After all, although their own Pokémon were quite strong, they were not as good as the Pokémon belonging to Jiang Ming's parents. I plan to borrow a Jengar from my father. After all, the place we're going to this time, although not as dangerous as the Dongting Lake Secret Realm, will definitely still have some dangers. It would be better to have a stronger Pokémon by our side. Jiang Ming originally planned to go to the hospital with Huo Ting, since he had temporarily teamed up with Huo Ting. After all, it's clear that Hotting won't have any major problems in the short term. Sure, then we'll be counting on you for Anhui from now on. Upon hearing Jiang Ming's words under these circumstances, the trainers naturally turned their attention to him quickly. One of the trainers hesitated for a moment, then looked at Jiang Ming with delight and spoke. Although the trainers were all worried about Hotting's condition because Jiang Ming had just given Hotting the antidote, they were not too concerned. Originally, Jiang Ming wanted to find out more about their situation, but after hearing these words, he silently led a group of elves to retreat nomade and headed towards Jiang Hongman's location. However, their advantage will soon disappear after Jiang Ming chooses to borrow his parents' spirits. Feuding, who believed that Jiang Ming could be of great help to them, waved his hand and hurriedly went to the hospital with his trainer while happily speaking to Jiang Ming. Now that he's a team member, it's definitely necessary for him to help his teammates at this time. He knew exactly how strong he was, so all he needed to do was confirm that there were indeed people in the shadows watching him and plotting against him. Having received Flint's response, Jiang Ming stood calmly in place. After Flint and the other trainers had run far away, he turned around with his Pokémon and began searching the surrounding area. Once Jengar is by his side, he'll have someone to rely on. Even if some hidden trainer tries to harm him, he can at least guarantee his own safety. However, no matter how extraordinary Jiang Ming is, he is still young and experienced. Although he is an absolute genius among his peers, he can only go head-to-head with these experienced people and cannot completely crush them. They were clearly unhappy that Jiang Ming wanted to borrow a Pokémon, since the Pokémon Jiang Ming currently possessed were already quite powerful. Among those messages, they naturally learned about Jiang Ming's powerful parents. Regardless of which of Jiang Ming's parents he is looking for, it would be a tremendous help to them. Jiang Ming, who was searching the vicinity with the elf, immediately overheard their conversation. His search wasn't particularly large-scale, and those hiding in the shadows didn't notice Jiang Ming's actions. Upon hearing Jiang Ming's words, the group of trainers hiding in the shadows began to huddle together and whisper among themselves. As for the rest, we can deal with them later. Right now, the most important thing is to borrow Jengar, which is currently free. But remembering Squirtle's earlier actions, Jiang Ming, who had left the area with Hotton, stopped and spoke directly to the other trainers who were still tense around him. With this idea in mind, Jiang Ming quickly found Jiang Hongman. Jiang Hongman really didn't expect Jiang Ming to plan to borrow Jengar back so soon. When Jiang Ming brought Jengar back, Jiang Hongman originally thought that Jiang Ming probably wouldn't appear for a while. However, upon learning that someone was hiding behind him, Jiang Hongman did not refuse Jiang Ming but spoke with a serious expression. There's no need to do things that are too dangerous. After all, given their current capabilities, there's no need for Jiang Ming to take any risks. Jiang Ming naturally knew exactly what Jiang Hongman was talking about. Seeing that Jiang Hongman didn't approve of his risky behavior, Jiang Ming could understand, but he still shook his head. If they don't go through some danger, these elves in my hands might not be able to grow. Although Jiang Ming knew clearly that even if the Pokémon in his hands could not grow, he could not grow either, it wouldn't actually cause any major problems. After all, Jiang Hongman and the others are still there to hold things up, aren't they? However, Jiang Ming was never one to stay put forever, and he had plenty of resources at his disposal, which he couldn't afford to waste. Just as Jiang Ming was thinking, Jiang Hongman, who was in front of him, glanced at Jiang Ming's situation but did not say anything more at this time. Everyone has been young and impetuous, and so did he, so he understands Jiang Ming. He was quite satisfied with Jiang Ming's rather ambitious ideas. CCDF, with this satisfaction, he finally sang in front of the song. Jiang Ming, who had received Jengar, chuckled and thanked them a few times before deciding to return to the place where Hotton had previously lived with Jengar. After all, although Hotting was attacked by the poison needle, he reacted quickly and injected Hotting with some antidote immediately. With his relatively quick methods, it's believed that Hotting's side will recover to normal in no time at all. Now that it's confirmed that it won't take much time for Hotting, he certainly can't waste any more time here. Not wanting to waste any time, Jiang Ming quickly returned to his destination with Jengar and his Pokémon. As soon as he got back, Jiang Ming saw a familiar elf standing at the door. This was none other than the Arbok that had attacked Hotting not long ago. Upon seeing Jiang Ming arrive, Arbok immediately stretched its neck straight towards him. Jiang Ming's eyelids twitched and he slowly took out his Pokéball, ball, coldly staring at Ekans. Neither Hotting nor he could actually be defeated by Arbok, and Arbok was able to successfully launch a sneak attack just now simply because this song elf appeared too quickly. The person making the reservation never expected that there would be such an enemy behind them, which is why they were able to be ambushed by this elf. But now that Jiang Ming knows that such an enemy exists, he will never be ambushed by such an enemy. Just as Jiang Ming was thinking, Arbok probably saw his restless attack and immediately opened its mouth towards him. /A/. It made a very urgent gesture, seemingly not intending to attack Jiang Ming. Jiang Ming, having no idea what the elf was trying to do, slowly backed away and began to observe his surroundings. After all, Jiang Ming knew clearly that Arbok was not his match, strictly speaking. His opponent was actually Zhang Tian, the trainer behind Ekans. If Zhang Tian were nearby, he would have to figure out how to deal with the Arbok in front of him before making a move against Zhang Tian. However, if Zhang Tian wasn't around, there was really no need for him to attack Arbok, mainly because he didn't know what Arbok's plans were. If he were to make a move and suddenly fall into a trap, he would suffer a huge loss. To avoid falling into a trap, Jiang Ming looked around. Just then, Jengar, who was standing next to Jiang Ming, suddenly rushed out. It might take Jiang Ming's Pokémon a while to fight Arbok, but Jengar's combat power means it won't take much time for Jengar to finish off Arbok. A Jengar with this level of fighting power wouldn't tolerate any existence. Seeing Jiang Ming's vigilance, he immediately rushed towards Arbok and launched an attack. /His. Arbok, which was suddenly attacked, wanted to fight back, but Jengar's fighting power rendered Arbok powerless. Unable to resist at all, the Arbok could no longer block the way and could only start to flee quickly. How could Jengar let Ekans go so easily? Seeing Ekans run away, Jengar immediately gave chase. However, unlike Gardevoir's reliability, Jengar, although it caught up, did not immediately attack Ekans. It's clear that this elf has a rather serious sense of wickedness. Jiang Ming had a headache seeing Jengar deliberately trying to scare Ekans. It has to be said that Jengar really doesn't tolerate anyone, but it is indeed quite playful. As for Jiang Ming, this playful elf definitely needs to be closely monitored. Jiang Ming, realizing some problems with Jengar, sighed and decided not to help deal with Jengar's behavior of summoning Ekans at this time. Now that Jengar is holding back Ekans, he has more time to find Ekans's trainer, Zhang Tian. Jiang Ming certainly wouldn't miss such a great opportunity. Not wanting to miss the opportunity, Jiang Ming immediately began searching the vicinity. Just as Jiang Ming was conducting his search, Huo Ting returned to the area as Jiang Ming had expected. As soon as Hotting returned, he saw Ekans being chased around by Jengar. With a serious expression, he approached Ekans and immediately took out his Pokéball, ball, intending to avenge his previous defeat. Ekans, which was being chased around by Jengar, had no ability to resist Hotting's attack. Under the relentless attacks from Hotting and the Pokémon, Ekans could only let out a cry before collapsing to the ground. Seeing that Arbok was already lying on the ground and Zhang Tian still hadn't come out, Jiang Ming, who was still searching around, finally realized that something was wrong. "Please give me flowers." Could it be that Arbok didn't come here to attack him but rather for some other reason? Realizing this, Jiang Ming pondered for a moment and finally came to the furious Huo Ting's side, quickly restraining the trainer who was trying to launch a continuous attack on Arbok. Perhaps because Jiang Ming had given Huo Ting the antidote earlier, Huo Ting, who was being held down by Jiang Ming, wasn't particularly fierce. He just glanced at Jiang Ming with some confusion. It's clear that Hotting's attitude towards Arbok is actually quite malicious. Jiang Ming, who could understand Huo Ting to some extent, let out a sigh of relief and spoke to Huo Men with a hint of helplessness. The trainer of this Pokémon is not nearby. You should know that what drives the Pokémon to do certain things is probably the trainer's behavior, and it has little to do with the Pokémon itself. Of course, Hotting knew, and it was precisely because he knew that his expression immediately turned serious when he learned that Arbok's trainer was not nearby. Is that kid planning something? He gritted his teeth and muttered something to Jiang Ming, then looked around and led the others to conduct a vicious search of the vicinity. Finally, he admitted that Jiang Ming was absolutely right. Zhang Tianzhai was indeed not there. Upon discovering that Zhang Tian was indeed not there, Hotting returned to Arbok's side. He no longer had the mind to directly attack Arbok since no one knew why this Pokémon had left its trainer and stayed there. If they manage to defeat Arbok but fall into a trap, they'll suffer a huge loss. Despite being somewhat wary, Midding hesitated for a moment before finally leading the trainer and Jiang Ming into the house. He then instructed his Pokémon to bind Arbok securely. After confirming that Arbok had no ability to struggle with 547, Hotting then led Arbok into the house. Jiang Ming glanced at Huo Ting's action but did not stop him at that moment. He simply followed Huo Ting into the house calmly. As soon as they stepped inside, the Arbok, which had been fiercely struggling, suddenly stopped moving. Jiang Ming could almost clearly sense the change in Arbok, and he looked seriously in Arbok's direction. Meanwhile, Hotting was keeping a close eye on Arbok. Under the watchful eyes of the two trainers, Ekans hesitantly moved in front of Jiang Ming and spat out a note to him. Why didn't you do that outside? Jiang didn't understand Arbok's sudden action. For him, Arbok could have done that outside, so he wouldn't have taken Arbok down at this time. After all, the fact that Arbok gave the note to Leaf was enough to prove that something was wrong with Arbok's visit here this time. As a very vigilant trainer, Hotting would never let something go wrong easily once he realized that something was amiss. Therefore, he couldn't understand why Arbok, who could clearly sense his danger from the outside, didn't spit out the note. In contrast to Hotting's incomprehension, Jiang Ming quickly realized that the Arbok trainer was also aware of the people watching them. Besides, he also knew clearly that Zhang Tian didn't seem to have much of a relationship with those people. If they really did have a relationship, there would be no need to be so vigilant against them. Realizing that Zhang Tian and those people outside were likely competitors, Jiang Ming pondered for a moment and then came to Huo Ting's side. Still not understanding why Arbok insisted on entering the house before taking out the note, Hotting was interrogating Arbok. However, perhaps because Zhang Tian also knew that Huo Ting's side was not very strong, Arbok did not intend to give Huo Ting any hints but just kept a close eye on Jiang Ming. Jiang Ming, who was being closely watched, clearly knew Arbok's current situation. He calmly picked up the note and then spoke to Huo Ting beside him about the fact that someone was watching them from outside. Hotting, who was interrogating Arbok, stopped. Are you sure? If that's the case, they might not be after you, they could very well be after me. After all, the person renting this place wasn't Jiang Ming, but him. He actually stayed here for quite a long time, and because he stayed here for so long, some trainers must know something about him here. But knowing this is one thing. In theory, he doesn't have anything that other trainers would covet. It is precisely for this reason that Ting has always been open and honest, never hiding anything. But if things are really as Jiang Ming said, then he needs to consider whether he has been too generous, which has attracted the attention of some training 2.2 companies. Jiang Ming could tell what the law was, but his opinion on it was different. However, he doesn't intend to reveal this difference now. He decided to first ascertain the situation of the Arbok. With this decision in mind, Jiang Ming opened the note from Arbok and began to read it. After some time, Jiang Ming closed the note and confirmed Arbok's purpose in coming here. Arbok was actually calling for help on behalf of its trainer. I don't know what those people behind this are up to, but I've never been one to be bullied. Since you're planning to help that trainer named Zhang Tian, I can go with you. However, it must be said that Zhang Tian's ability to gather so much information in such a short period of time is enough to prove that he has considerable ability. With this ability, he also felt it necessary to help Zhang Tian escape a crisis. Therefore, at the end of his distress letter, Zhang Tian clearly stated that as long as Jiang Ming was willing to rescue him, he could provide Jiang Ming with more information that Jiang Ming couldn't obtain, and also accompany Jiang Ming to solve the problem that Huo Ting mentioned. Seeing that Jiang Ming didn't say much, Huo Ting let out a sigh of relief, then sneered. Zhang Tian, who was seriously injured, quickly broke away from the battle. Just then, Arbok rushed towards Zhang Tian and stood in front of him to block the attack. "These people are targeting your parents." Jiang Ming didn't speak, he just stared intently at Jiang. It wasn't until later, when Zhang Tian learned some information from those who were chasing him, that he realized their target was Jiang Ming. After all, he and Jiang Ming didn't have any deep-seated hatred at the beginning. Having thought it through, Jiang Ming clenched his fist and smiled as he looked at Huo Ting, who was already staring intently at him. Without hesitation, he told Huo Ting about Zhang Tian's situation. After he was completely free, he would try to get some good stuff from Zhang Tian. Dissatisfied, he gleaned some more information from those people. He faced quite a few enemies this time, which resulted in him sustaining many injuries. "With all the information you've given me, I understand now. Although things seem calm on the surface, there are actually countless crises lurking beneath the surface." He was naturally unhappy to be suddenly threatened by some people under such circumstances. However, ever since the Dongting Lake's secret realm, he has clearly realized that his strength is actually quite even with Jiang Ming's, and Jiang Ming often comes up with some strange ideas. When Jiang Ming arrived here, it was clear that most of his body was covered in blood. Zhang Tian's location was quite accurate, which meant that Jiang Ming's team 103 didn't need to spend much time to find Zhang Tian, who was engaged in acid warfare along with Fu Ting. Zhang Tian probably knew exactly what benefits he should offer Jiang Ming when he sent this letter asking for help. Having learned some things through his own abilities, Zhang Tian sent Arbok to Jiang Ming and delivered this letter of distress to him. The note clearly stated that Zhang Tian was pursued by some trainers after leaving this place. They wanted Zhang Tian to openly confront Jiang Ming on their behalf. Seeing Jiang Ming arrive, Zhang Tianling breathed a sigh of relief. Upon learning that Zhang Tian had been pursued after leaving this place, Fudding's expression turned serious. Coupled with Jiang Ming's words just now, he took out his piquet ball with a serious expression and began to look at Jiang Ming with a serious expression. Thanks to Jiang Ming's ideas, Zhang Tian didn't actually intend to do anything too bad to Jiang Ming. Sometimes he even wanted to cooperate with Jiang Ming. Although Zhang Tian frequently caused trouble for Jiang Ming, he was also often eager to take over some of the things under Jiang Ming's control. Jiang Ming was not very willing to believe Zhang Tian. As Arbok finished its action, Zhang Tian, who finally had some free time, commanded Arbok to join the battle before quickly coming to Jiang Ming's side and speaking briefly. Jiang Ming had already guessed that this kind of behavior would definitely occur during the reservation. When he heard him say this, he immediately smiled, and then without hesitation, he picked up the Ekans next to him and the other Pokémon and trainers and hurriedly headed towards the location given by Zhang Tian. At first, Zhang Tian thought that his enemies were coming to cause him trouble when he was being chased, so he didn't take it seriously. Although he knew before he came here that these people were after him. But Jiang Ming's expression remained extremely solemn after learning the news from Zhang Tian. Zhang Tian also had a solemn expression just like Jiang Ming. Given the current group of young people's experience, dealing with these trainers will indeed be quite difficult. Just then, a stinging jellyfish suddenly darted out of the river. The problems that these extraordinary people can cause are naturally also extraordinary. His eyes widened in disbelief. He had never imagined that a stinging jellyfish would be lurking in the river. Jiang Ming had previously guessed that Zhang Tian definitely had more than just Ekans and Butterfree. Zhang Tian glanced at Huo Ting, who was clearly troubled and obviously knew about the situation there. As a mercenary with a lot of experience, Zhang Tian firmly believed that he was absolutely capable of solving certain problems. Zhang Tian's elf seems to be no match for the stinging jellyfish. As Zhang Tian moved, the stinging jellyfish began to angrily launch a water attack on the people on the shore. Thinking about how complicated things were, Zhang Tian felt a headache coming on. This is normal though. If the target of this attack was his parents, then their strength level should not be lower than that of a quasi-heavenly king. Just as he was filled with regret, Hu Ting, who had come with Jiang Ming, suddenly pointed to a river not far away. He suddenly regretted getting involved in this matter. Under the onslaught of the Tentacruel's water jets, Zhang Tian's Pokémon could only dodge in all directions, unable to offer any resistance. As it turned out, Jiang Ming's guess was indeed correct. Zhang Tian had more than just those two elves. He also has several powerful Pokémon. Its enormous body occupies this stretch of river. Hotten, who had originally planned to bring out his own elf, stopped moving inside this enormous body. They are currently in a wilderness area. If this group's target is Jiang Ming, Zhang Tian will be vigilant but will not act too nervously. They were engaged in a fierce battle in the wilderness when suddenly a gurgling sound came from the middle of the river. Although there are many people like this, it is relatively easy to solve their problems. However, if these people's target is Jiang Ming's parents, then things will become complicated. What should I do? My Pokémon can't beat this Tentacruel letter 3005. Knowing full well that his Pokémon was no match for Tentacruel, he quickly retreated, his expression turning worried. After all, Jiang Ming has already shown remarkable talent at such a young age, and his parents, who can raise a trainer like him, are certainly not simple either. Knowing full well what was troubling Hotten, he stopped wasting words and quickly began taking out the other Poké balls from his person. Even if a student like this is exceptionally gifted, it's unlikely to attract any serious trouble. The very perceptive Hotten immediately took out his Poké ball. Knowing he couldn't escape this time, he could only grimace as he threw out the two powerful Pokémon and charged towards the Tentacruel in front of him. The wilderness is divided into two areas separated by a small river. To the left of the river is the city, while to the right is the wilderness area where they are now. Jiang Ming, who had been observing from the sidelines, looked around at the current situation. Seeing that Zhang Tian's expression had become particularly heavy, he knew clearly that neither Zhang Tian nor Hu Ting could solve the current problem. Therefore, those who targeted Jiang Ming were nothing more than a group of ordinary trainers who coveted the valuable items in Jiang Ming's possession and wanted to steal them. After all, everyone knows that Jiang Ming is just a student. Trainers of this level are already among the top 10,000. He suddenly turned his head and spoke to Jenger, who was still observing the surrounding situation. Jenger is absolutely reliable when it comes to truly important matters. Hearing Jiang Ming's question, it stopped observing and began to nod seriously at Jiang Ming. But now that he's already here, even if he does retreat, the enemy has already got his eye on him. However, this situation does not last long. Just when Zhang 293 was feeling too much pressure and couldn't take it anymore, Jiang Ming threw Nidoking and Lucario out of his hands. As he heard his voice, Jiang Ming realized that Jenger was following closely behind him and controlling him. Under his arrangement, Jenger has begun to investigate. If Jenger is reliable enough in the coming period, then they can turn the tide. Hu Ting was actually considering retreating. After all, he hadn't expected that Jiang Ming had provoked such a powerful enemy. The middle-aged man clearly harbored a lot of hostility towards Jiang Ming. Seeing that Jiang Ming had noticed him, he immediately became extremely angry and shouted at Jiang Ming, "You little brat, all you can do is use such petty tricks." Since they had already run into each other, even though the level difference was quite large, Jiang Ming still decided to give it his all. "I think if you don't have any solutions, then we'll just have to lie here." The strategy of having several Pokémon take turns attacking Tentacruel was indeed somewhat effective. At least while Tentacruel wasn't seriously injured, it was no longer able to continue attacking Jiang Ming and his group. Having received Jenger's nod, Jiang Ming suddenly turned around and went straight to Zhang Tian's side. Zhang Tian wiped the water that had sprayed onto his face from the attack of the stinging jellyfish and looked at Jiang Ming with a stern expression. Being extremely clever, he suddenly turned his head and focused his gaze directly on Hu Ting. But Zhang Tian wasn't stupid. He knew that if Jiang Ming's spirit continued to rest, it would eventually give out. Whether it's Jiang Ming, Zhang Tian, or Hu Ting, they are all smart and know that if they don't resolve the real crisis, they won't be able to hold out in this CSEC for long. With the help of Jiang Ming's two Pokémon, Zhang Tian's Pokémon fighter can take a break. Therefore, Hotten, who had originally intended to refuse, could only nod seriously in the end and take out his elf. Jiang Ming understood exactly what Zhang Tian meant by those words, but he said nothing. As a trainer with a modicum of sense, he knew perfectly well that it was better to stick with Jiang Ming and take on a big one than to retreat at this point. Jiang Ming, who was already on edge, looked up immediately upon hearing this voice. Looking up, Jiang Ming realized that Jenger was actually behind a tree quite close to him. We take turns. The two Pokémon that were thrown out moved very quickly. Before Zhang Tian could react, the two Pokémon had already taken the place of Zhang Tian's Pokémon and then began to continuously attack the Tentacruel in front of him. Just as Jiang Ming was looking forward to it, a cry of an elf suddenly came from ahead. No wonder he didn't attack or run away, even though he was extremely angry. He could only hope that Jenger would be reliable enough. I'll have Lucario challenge that Tentacruel later. You can take this opportunity to see where the Tentacruel's trainer is and if they can do it. Because all the focus was on Jenger, Jiang Ming was unable to provide a budget for this battle. However, facing difficulties is one thing, solving the problem is another. However, if Jenger proves unreliable in the coming period, then he will indeed have no choice but to lie to Zhang Tian as he suggested. Immediately following was an angry man's voice. Behind the tree, like Jenger, was a middle-aged man who looked completely unfamiliar. The other party is a big shot, they have no need to show off at this time. Seeing the two people's attitude towards him change drastically, Jiang Ming calmly looked at the state of the Tentacruel not far away, then sneered and directly arranged for Jenger to bring the trainer over. Before Curlia could react after being thrown out, Jiang Ming quickly gave the order, use hypnosis. He has to take a gamble. After all, both the Pokémon and the trainer were already tied up. In these few minutes, neither the person nor the Pokémon could launch any powerful attacks against them. Seeing the trainer charging towards it, Tentacruel was confused, but it still reacted quickly and stopped its attack. Neither Zhang Tian nor Huo Ting noticed the situation with Jenger, they were focused solely on eliminating the Tentacruel. Standing next to Jiang Ming, Zhang Tian was immediately surprised when he heard Jiang Ming's words. Fortunately, he didn't offend Jiang Ming too much. Otherwise, with his limited intelligence, he really wouldn't be able to compete with Jiang Ming, since Jiang Ming is definitely a martial arts enthusiast. After all, their Pokémon are inferior to their opponents in terms of combat power, level, and everything else. Therefore, Jiang Ming doesn't really like using Curlia in direct combat since Curlia's mechs are a bit fragile. If we take this opportunity to attack, we will have wasted this great opportunity. Unfortunately, Jiang Ming had a different idea. He knew clearly that with Jenger around, they could take a gamble. So just as Curlia was casting hypnosis on the Tentacruel in front of her, Jiang Ming turned to Jenger and said, use Venom Blast. Jiang Ming usually prefers to use this type of elf which has a relatively low margin for error, only when it is in a safer situation, but now he has no other choice. Upon learning that Jiang Ming had already subdued the Tentacruel trainer, Zhang Tian suddenly felt a sense of relief. After confirming that the trainer was alright, Jiang Ming looked at Tentacruel, which was still fighting with other Pokémon not far away, and immediately pushed the trainer away. The very obedient Jenger immediately launched Venom Blast 5 times at the Tentacruel in front of it. Unexpectedly, while they were trying to deal with Tentacruel, Jiang Ming actually opted for a Tentacruel trainer instead. In fact, based on his thinking, he believed that they should take this opportunity to run away. It seems that Jenger is indeed more reliable in crucial moments. Taking advantage of this gap to escape might not be of much use to these people, but at least they still have a chance to gamble. Curlia isn't really suited for combat. Most of the time her attacks are mental attacks. With this determination, Jiang Ming directly sold Curlia. Taking advantage of the stinging jellyfish's quick reaction, Jiang Ming's eyes lit up and he quickly pulled out his Curlia. Fortunately, Jenger was reliable enough. With Jenger's help, Jiang Ming firmly believed that he was fully capable of helping Curlia successfully defeat Tentacruel. Jenger was particularly obedient, and under Jiang Ming's arrangement, it quickly brought the trainer directly to Jiang Ming's side. If Curlian's subsequent attacks are not successful enough, then there may not be a second chance. As a Pokémon that has reached the level of a near Elite Four member, Tentacruel has always had a very strong reaction ability. Jiang Ming, who was still uncertain about the outcome of the battle, breathed a sigh of relief, then smiled and took out a piquet ball, saying to Zhang Tian beside him, "The trainer of that tentacruel has been captured." Zhang Tian, who wasn't particularly inclined to use his brain, stopped what he was doing and waited for Jiang Ming's instructions. Hu Ting stared at Jiang Ming with particular tension upon hearing his words. The level difference between the two Pokémon is too great. Even if we use hypnosis now, it's impossible to successfully hypnotize them. Jiang Ming knew exactly what Zhang Tian was thinking and why Zhang Tian was so nervous. If it were only Curlia's hypnosis, things could very well turn out as Zhang Tian said. They wouldn't have the ability to attack the tentacruel, and the hypnosis would ultimately be resisted by the tentacruel. Once Tentacruel realizes what's happening and resists the hypnosis, Curlia simply won't be able to stand up to it. At that time, Curlia, Jiang Ming, or other trainers will all be injured as a result. However, Curlia's hypnosis combined with Jenger's Venom Blast makes all the difference. Tentacruel, initially enraged by Curlia's hypnosis, didn't even have time to deal with Curlia before being overwhelmed and forced to retreat by Jenger's venomous attack. Just then, Janullian once again used hypnosis on the stinging jellyfish in front of her. The repeated attacks had already exhausted Tentacruel, and Jenger and Tentacruel were of similar levels, with neither being weaker than the other. Facing a powerful opponent, coupled with previous events that exacerbated Tentacruel's fatigue, Curlia's hypnosis triggered this exhaustion at that very moment. This trigger caused Tentacruel to fall into a deep sleep, even though it didn't want to. However, under Curlia's countless hypnotic attacks, it began to drift off into a drowsy state. Jiang Ming took this opportunity to prevent Kuru from staying there any longer. His eyes lit up and he quickly called out to Curlia in front of him, "Curlia, go back." Curlia clearly didn't want to stay there any longer, since she knew she was no match for Tentacruel. Having received Jiang Ming's words, Curlia, who no longer wanted to stay where she was, immediately returned to Jiang Ming's side. Taking advantage of the moment when Curarian returned, Jiang Ming, together with Zhang Tian's Pokémon, Midorima's Pokémon and Jenger, immediately launched a final attack on Tentacruel. The once powerful Tentacruel finally glanced reluctantly at Curlia during this wave of attacks, then turned back onto the stream. The Tentacruel trainer gritted his teeth as he watched the Tentacruel fall into the river. He never expected that Tang Ran, at his current level, would be beaten into such a state by Jiang Ming and his 10 young friends. Reluctantly, he put away the stinging jellyfish, coldly observing Jiang Ming and Zhang Tian's faces. After a while, he finally spoke with a mocking laugh. "These young people nowadays are indeed formidable. I wasn't prepared enough this time, but I hope you can withstand my attack next time." After saying that, he didn't plan to stay any longer. After all, he had already been defeated by these young kids, and staying would only make him more embarrassed. To avoid such embarrassment, he snorted and then turned to leave. Jiang Ming certainly couldn't let him go. After all, the other party's target was him and his parents. No one knows what other methods the other party will come up with to harm him after leaving this time. In this situation, he must first find out the other party's identity. However, given his current status, it's clear he wouldn't be able to get any useful information from the inquiry. So, seeing the trainer in front of him angrily trying to leave Jiang Ming, he suddenly spoke provocatively. "Hey sir, you're quite capable, so why are you causing trouble for us kids? If you really have a grudge against my parents, you should go directly to them." Jiang Ming paused here, noticing the man's somewhat unpleasant expression because of his words, and asked directly, "Or are you simply no match for my parents, so you're targeting me instead?" These words clearly ignited the man's anger. Hearing Jiang Ming's words, the man, who was already annoyed by the defeat, immediately gripped his piquet ball and glared at Jiang Ming. "Do you think I only have one stinging jellyfish?" Hearing this, Jiang Ming sighed and spread his hands with a hint of helplessness. "I know you can't possibly only have one Tentacruel, but I also know that no matter how many Pokémon you have, you obviously can't beat my parents, which is why you started with me." Jiang Ming's statement is clearly true. The man's face darkened even more after being told the truth. Jiang Ming was just testing him. He didn't really intend to anger him. Seeing that his face had turned so pale, he quickly retreated. The man snorted when he saw his action. "Now you know fear, but it's too late." As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately took out the Pokeball again. Having already guessed that he would take out a Pokeball, Jiang Ming immediately took out his phone. Hu Ting and Zhang Tian, who witnessed Jiang Ming's actions, both looked rather displeased. They had fought against the Tentacruel, so they knew exactly how strong the Tentacruel was. If it weren't for their good luck this time and Jiang Ming's clever tricks, they would have had no chance to resist such powerful combat strength. They've managed to solve the problem by sheer luck, but Jiang Ming's continued provocation is something they simply can't understand. The inability to understand leads to dissatisfaction. They didn't understand what Jiang Ming was thinking, but they felt that Jiang Ming was simply asking for trouble. The two, who had no intention of continuing to deal with someone who was tired of living, exchanged a glance and decided to take this opportunity to run away. Just then, Jiang Ming made a phone call in front of everyone and looked at the man in front of him with a smile. "Now that you know they are my parents, do you think they will abandon me?" The man who had intended to harm Jiang Ming changed his expression, finally understanding why Jiang Ming had dared to be so reckless earlier. However, it must be said that Jiang Ming's actions did indeed impose some limitations on him. Just as Jiang Ming said, he really couldn't beat Jiang Ming's parents, so he wanted to start by attacking Jiang Ming. But no matter how much he wanted to take action, he knew he couldn't go too far. After all, Jiang Ming's parents had considerable power. If he goes too far and provokes others to fight him to the death, then even if he's from the east, he'll probably be skinned alive. Knowing full well that going too far could result in serious consequences, the man, despite throwing out the stinging jellyfish and looking fierce, acted with great caution. He often did this kind of thing, making threats on the surface but not actually harming anyone, and was quite skilled at it, so he thought he wouldn't be discovered by Jiang Ming. But to my surprise, this guy was incredibly clever. Not only did he discover it, he even made a phone call. Seeing how easily Jiang Ming had revealed his situation, the man finally realized that he had missed a golden opportunity. To avoid suffering again and missing this great opportunity, the man had no choice but to throw a Pokeball at Jiang Ming. As the man finished speaking, Jiang Ming led Zhang Tian and Fu Ting in a swift retreat. As soon as he retreated, he saw an elf charging straight towards him. Just as the Pokémon charged forward, the 80 trainers standing behind it did not make a move but instead took the opportunity to turn around and run away. Jiang Ming, who had initially thought this person was trying to harm him despite his threats, finally understood what was going on when he saw his actions. The other party didn't want him to follow them or expose themselves, so they used this method to escape. Jiang Ming was somewhat dissatisfied as he looked at the Pokémon blocking his way and the trainer who had run away. However, because the Pokémon that the person threw out was of a high level, despite his dissatisfaction, Jiang Ming could only take Hu Ting and Zhang Tian and run away first. Fortunately, he didn't run for long. After running for a while, a familiar elf appeared in front of him. That was none other than Gardevoir, whom he had called to come to the rescue. Seeing that the elf was becoming increasingly uncontrollable, they became even more nervous about the situation. In just a few moves, Jengar and Gardevoir, working together, completely defeated the Pokémon. Jengar, who was protecting Jiang Ming as he fled, suddenly brightened up when it saw Gardevoir being pulled to the rescue by Jiang Ming. If they haven't fought the Tentacruel, it's okay if they get attacked since they still have their own Pokémon. Because it was impossible, they could only place their hopes on Jengar. Jiang Ming knew exactly why they were nervous, but he remained calm since Jengar didn't just run away as Zhang Tian had described. This kind of not-so-powerful Pokémon naturally can't beat Jengar and Gardevoir, which are two Pokémon that have been carefully trained by their trainers. Zhang Tian urgently asked Jiang Ming, "Isn't your elf a little unreliable?" The elf behind Jiang Ming was originally thrown out by that man to help block the view. To put it bluntly, it was an abandoned elf. Therefore, he knew clearly that Qiu Gui wouldn't be able to run for long. Jengar immediately rushed towards Gardevoir. Jengar ran away with Jiang Ming to protect him. Now that it has a helper and is strong enough, the Pokémon that was originally no match for it can no longer withstand its attack under its superior strength. He wasn't particularly interested in turning this Pokémon into his own. After all, no matter how much effort a trainer puts into raising it, it would still end up serving the trainer. The problem is that Tentacruel is really strong, which caused trainers whose Pokémon are not as strong as Tentacruel to expend a lot of energy when calling for their Pokémon. However, before conducting the study, he didn't intend to let the Pokémon lie on the ground indefinitely. After all, it would take some effort to pull a giant Pokémon back, so it was better to let the Pokémon stay in its Poké Ball. Jengar is going to find help to deal with the Pokémon together. The two elves seemed to have discussed something, and after determining their specific target, they immediately headed towards the elf behind Jiang Ming. Trainers generally don't spend a lot of time and energy on Pokémon that can be easily discarded. Knowing about this kind of Pokémon, Jiang Ming planned to give it directly to Shen Fei for research. Because of Jengar's reliability, Zhang Tian's initial nervousness gradually eased. Having confirmed that the Pokémon had been defeated, Jiang Ming didn't waste any words and quickly took out a Poké Ball to put the Pokémon away. With Jengar running away like that, they are very likely to be. Zhang Tian, who had no idea what Jiang Ming was thinking, watched Jiang Ming put the Pokémon into the Poké Ball and assumed that Jiang Ming intended to keep the Pokémon for himself. He needs to become stronger, so he should do it even if it means taking risks. After all, that place was one of the more profitable locations he had recently discovered. If it weren't for the stinging jellyfish incident, Fortin would have been determined to go to the island he had discovered. Huo Ting, who was still watching Gardevoir and Jengar with lingering fear, quickly realized after hearing Zhang Tian's words that Zhang Tian was clearly trying to curry favor with Jiang Ming. The incident with the stinging jellyfish made Jiang Ming realize that although he had grown to this stage and was much more capable than his peers, he was still not strong enough. These countless enemies made it clear that if they still went there, they would likely encounter even greater danger. Worried that this danger would bring great harm to Jiang Ming, Huo Ting pondered and spoke to Jiang Ming. The two rather proud elves had no intention of so easily handing over their abilities. In this situation, it's better to become complete friends and you might even gain some benefits. Without intending to say much, Midorita calmly approached Jengar and Gardevoir to test something. For this small benefit, Zhang Tian quickly realized what was going on and said to Jiang Ming with a smile, "Even if you take a Pokémon that already has a trainer, it won't be of much use. It won't listen to you." He couldn't bear to abandon that place. "I know this is dangerous, but I can't stay here forever, I have to grow up." After all, he had such a powerful enemy, plus several other enemies lurking near his residence. He looked at Jiang Ming thoughtfully, considering Jiang Ming's actions just now as well as the strength of Jiang Ming's parents, Jengar and Gardevoir. "If all else fails, you can actually withdraw from this cooperation. I'm here to reason with you." 14,402,422, Feilu 210,512,390. Someone like Jiang Ming, with his own remarkable abilities and the support of his equally powerful parents, is bound to grow increasingly powerful in the future. But after the incident with the stinging jellyfish, even though he was a little reluctant, Huo Ting still hesitated and looked at Jiang Ming before deciding to give Jiang Ming a chance to choose. He didn't have any deep-seated hatred for that person, and now that they had fought together, they could be considered half-friends. But he chuckled and shook his head at Fortin without hesitation. Unfortunately, it wasn't very useful. Jengar and Gardevoir, these two high-level Pokémon, seemed to get along well with Jiang Ming, but that was only true for Jiang Ming. However, recognizing it is one thing, whether or not to help is another. As long as this kind of flattery isn't too egregious and doesn't affect one's own interests, then one has no right to say anything more. He, who usually didn't have any kind thoughts, thought about it for a while and finally decided that he could do Jiang Ming a favor. If it were a trainer of a lower level, these two Pokémon would still act rather arrogantly. Even though they saw through Huo Ting's thoughts, the two elves still calmly returned to Jiang Ming's side. The two rather arrogant elves could tell that Hotten wanted to get some skills from them. Unable to gain anything from the two elves, Huo Ting awkwardly returned to Jiang Ming's side and began to tell Jiang Ming about their previous plan with a slightly helpless expression. "Although I need to grow, what you said is true, so I plan to borrow Gardevoir from my mother and have it come with me along with Jengar. That way, at least I'll have a backup plan and you won't have to worry too much." After making this decision, Jiang Ming considered his subsequent situation and immediately took out his phone to speak directly to Huo Ting next to him. However, understanding was one thing, but he didn't intend to care. After all, someone like Jiang Ming with his status and character was indeed worth currying favor with. How could Jiang Ming, who had received the order, not know what order truly meant? To his surprise, he had only been gone for a few minutes when he returned to find 10 Curlia that looked frightened, requesting 0 flowers. This week, they need to prepare all sorts of props and also deal with the enemies lurking in the shadows. He enthusiastically led Jiang Ming and Zhang Tian back to his rented place, and then happily told them about the island and the time when they would leave. With 2 such powerful spirits at once, Jiang Ming could withstand most dangers, and his side was definitely not a completely weak person either. Jiang Ming, who had received Huo Ting's arrangement, didn't care about it and simply nodded. Having confirmed that there were no other problems with Huo Ting and knowing that Zhang Tian was also going along, Jiang Ming didn't say much but simply nodded quietly as Huo Ting arranged things. Jiang Ming's words did indeed give Huo Ting a great sense of security. Seeing Jiang Ming return, Curlia, finally having a trainer to back her up, hurriedly ran towards him, looking up at him with a slightly dejected expression. Etilda. Seeing that the group of elves were having a good time, he casually decided to take a stroll around the mall. Having confirmed that Shen Fei was also fine, Jiang Ming quickly began to live his daily life with his elf just as Huo Ting had suggested. Huo Ting was quite pleased to confirm that Jiang Ming had no ulterior motives. After all, the levels of these 2 elves are far higher than the combined levels of Jiang Ming and his wife. With this assessment, Huo Ting's attitude towards Jiang Ming's desire to go to the island with him softened considerably. In addition to places for humans to play, the large shopping mall also has places for elves. For the next 2 weeks, Jiang Ming took the elves to various places almost every day and then played with a group of elves in the vicinity. Zhang Tian, who was planning to join them after this incident, was no weakling either. If Jiang Ming only had 1 Jenger or 1 Gardevoir by his side, he might be a little worried that Jiang Ming wouldn't be able to defend himself if something went wrong. Because they didn't know the enemy's purpose, Huo Ting decided not to alert them and quickly discussed with Jiang Ming about sending some of his trainers to investigate. Jiang Ming, on the other hand, tried to continue his daily routine as much as possible to avoid alerting the trainers. They agreed to depart a week later. After giving a soft call, Curlia tapped the piquet ball in Jiang Ming's bag. With their combined strength and Jiang Ming's 2 Pokémon as backup, the island they planned to visit shouldn't pose any significant danger. The desire to get its piquet ball back was quite obvious. Jiang Ming, completely unaware of what had happened to Kiragoon, looked at the frightened Kiragoon, who only wanted to return to its piquet ball, and his expression turned somewhat unpleasant as he turned to look at the surrounding trainers. One of the sprites seemed to be having a good time here. While he was happily making arrangements, Jiang Ming had already spoken to Shen Fei about Gardevoir and gained her approval. These mundane and boring days would pass by for 3 or 4 days. On the 5th day, seeing that the elves were getting a little bored, Jiang Ming took them to a large shopping mall in the city center. Moreover, they have a wealth of combat experience. He was worried that Jiang Ming, a relatively strong trainer, might be too domineering, and he had even prepared how he should deal with this young trainer if Jiang Ming was domineering. He had witnessed Gardevoir's power just now. Seeing that Jiang Ming wasn't being too forceful, he breathed a sigh of relief and happily began to arrange other things. However, if the 2 elves were to unite, then his worries would be unnecessary. Jiang Ming thought that today would only be limited to the same period of the previous days and there wouldn't be any major problems. However, most trainers didn't seem to notice Curlia next to Jiang Ming. All they wanted was to have fun with their elves. After surveying the area and confirming that no trainer had attacked Curlia at this time, Jiang Ming, completely unaware of Curlia's situation, could only put Curlia into its piquet ball in a daze. He then went to the other elves. Apart from the strange 517 Lulian, the other Pokémon were clearly not frightened. They are having fun in various places. Upon seeing Jiang Ming arrive, the elves happily surrounded him. Jiang Ming, who had just caught a few Pokémon, was completely bewildered. He had no idea what Curlia had gone through here or why she was so scared that she just wanted to go back to her piquet ball. However, since he couldn't find the root cause of the problem, although he was a little confused, Jiang Ming could only put away his doubts and then silently put the Pokémon back into their piquet balls. They were probably having a lot of fun, so the Pokémon that were put back into their piquet balls didn't seem to have much of a reaction. Having confirmed that all the Pokémon were safe, Jiang Ming breathed a sigh of relief and decided to leave the mall with Jengar and Gardevoir. However, just as he was about to leave, a ball of water suddenly floated over from not far away. Jiang Ming swiftly dodged the water attack. At the very moment he dodged, a small puddle of water was sprinkled on the spot where he had just been standing. Besides the water, there was also a particularly familiar sound. What a coincidence, I didn't expect to meet you here. The voice was unmistakably that of the trainer who had previously caused them trouble with Tentacruel. Jiang Ming, who had no idea what had happened to Curlia or why she was so frightened that she only wanted to return to her piquet ball, instantly had an idea when he heard this voice. It seems that during the time he was away, Curlia may have encountered a Tentacruel, and the trainer of Tentacruel. Realizing this, Jiang Ming looked at the trainer in front of him with a serious expression. The trainer was carrying a bag with a rather large Tentacruel beside him. The Tentacruel also seems to have just been playing on the phantom device in the vicinity. There was still water on her clothes. Seeing that Jiang Ming had noticed it, the stinging jellyfish immediately waved its tentacles and stared menacingly at Jiang Ming. Jiang Ming, being stared at by a rather fierce stinging jellyfish, touched his nose but wasn't actually that panicked. After all, having defeated the Tentacruel some time ago, he already knew the Tentacruel's strength. His Pokémon might not be able to defeat Tentacruel, but he has a Jengar and a Gardevoir by his side. With the combined power of these two creatures, Tentacruel is no match for them. Jiang Ming, who didn't think Tentacruel would pose any threat to him, calmly shifted his attention to the Tentacruel's trainer and spoke with a cold smile. I never expected to run into you here, it's really a bit unlucky. The Tentacruel's trainer is clearly a rational trainer and won't get angry because of Jiang Ming's words. He just stared coldly at the piquet ball on Jiang Ming's body. Jiang Ming knew that the trainer opposite him was clearly not satisfied with the result of the previous 2.1. Seeing his cold attitude, Jiang Ming silently retreated and then pushed Gardevoir and Jengar out. Jiang Ming then looked at the man in front of him with a cold smile. My Pokémon is indeed no match for yours, but it's really unfortunate that I brought two of my parents' Pokémon with me today. One sentence immediately brought the Tentacruel trainer, who was initially showing signs of interest, to a standstill. It's clear that he really can't beat Jiang Ming's parents. Because he couldn't beat them when he encountered Jiang Ming's parents' spirit, all he could do was have a contorted expression. Jiang Ming, who could clearly see that this trainer was no match for his parents' Pokémon, gave a mocking smile and then swaggered away with his two Pokémon. After all, he had bought almost everything he needed and had played with most of his Pokémon. Although he was a little surprised to see the Tentacruel trainer on his way out, since the other party couldn't do anything to him, he didn't need to cause any trouble in the mall. Jiang Ming, who didn't intend to cause any trouble in the mall, walked away relatively quickly with the two elves. However, the stinging jellyfish is even faster than him. Perhaps it was the resentment of being defeated some time ago that made this elf hold a grudge against Jiang Ming. Seeing that Jiang Ming tried to run away after saying a few words, Tentacruel immediately used its tentacles to lash out at Jiang Ming. Jengar and Gardevoir naturally wouldn't allow Jiang Ming to be attacked by other Pokémon so casually. The two elves, who were originally there to protect Jiang Ming, saw a tentacle appear out of the corner of their eye and immediately charged angrily toward the Tentacruel. However, after a short time, the two elves firmly caught the Tentacruel, whose combat power was weakened due to the lack of water. The trainer of Tentacruel was also surprised that his Pokémon moved so quickly. Seeing his Pokémon firmly held down by Jiang Ming's parents' two Pokémon, the trainer's expression was extremely ferocious. After a while, he finally spoke to Jiang Ming with a slightly helpless expression. My Pokémon has been feeling down lately because you defeated it. I guess it was just thinking about some things from the past that led to its actions. Jiang Ming didn't speak but calmly looked at the trainer of the Tentacruel, unaware of the meaning of those words. However, he did sense the trainer's attitude. Although they were on the verge of conflict when they first met, the Tentacruel trainer's attitude has become much more moderate now, probably because he knows that Tentacruel is not capable of dealing with him. The gentle Tentacruel trainer spoke with a hint of helplessness. Could you ask your Pokémon to release mine? It needs water and it's very uncomfortable in this waterless environment. Jiang Ming, who had been wondering why the trainer's attitude had suddenly softened, suddenly smiled and finally understood what was going on with the trainer. However, understanding is one thing, but whether or not one agrees is another. The fact that the stinging jellyfish attacked him first gave Jiang Ming more insight into the situation. Based on these principles, it would be a loss to let this elf go so easily. To avoid losses, Jiang Ming looked at Jenger, who was laughing wildly and stepping on Tentacruel, and then thoughtfully spoke to Tentacruel's trainer. Letting you go is certainly possible, but I have one condition. The trainer, who had already guessed that Jiang Ming wouldn't let his Pokémon off so easily, twitched his eyelids but remained silent. Jiang Ming didn't intend to waste words with him. He took out Curlia's Piquet ball and said with a displeased expression, "Your Pokémon should have seen my Pokémon just now and it scared my Pokémon, didn't it?" This was Jiang Ming's guess, but the Tentacruel trainer clearly knew something. Hearing Jiang Ming say this, he looked helpless but did not deny it. The fact that Jiang Ming did not deny it is enough to prove that his guess was true. Jiang Ming breathed a sigh of relief upon confirming that this was indeed true, and immediately released Chilgoon from its Piquet ball, looking seriously at the Tentacruel in front of him. "I want your spirit to apologize to my spirit." After his eyelids twitched wildly for a while, the Tentacruel trainer finally spoke to Jiang Ming with a ferocious expression. "You're raising your Pokémon like a child, aren't you? As a high-level and experienced trainer, I can defeat those who are not skilled in combat." In fact, Jiang Ming had guessed that Tentacruel would definitely not apologize, not because the poison jellyfish was arrogant or anything. Determined to gain some benefit, Jiang Ming looked intently at the Tentacruel trainer and spoke up just as the trainer was about to refuse. As a result, Jiang Ming now actually wants an elf who doesn't speak the same language to apologize to his elf. The Tentacruel trainer rubbed his forehead in exasperation and finally spoke to Jiang Ming with a sigh. In this situation, Jiang Ming taking away the elf that his family had spent a lot of time and effort on was a huge loss. Jiang Ming could also sense his frustration, so Jiang Ming did not let him attack Deed's Jenger at this moment. "Then let's change the terms. Tomorrow, have your Pokémon teach my Dragonite NE." Let's change the terms. It has to be said that this threat is quite serious. After all, the fact that Tentacruel has been trained to this stage is enough to prove that the trainer has put a lot of thought and effort into Tentacruel. After all, at his level, he is rarely threatened by other Pokémon or trainers. Given this enormous loss, it doesn't seem so hard to accept that it took Jiang Ming 10 stages to improve his skills. Simply put, their philosophies are completely different from those of the elves. This similar approach allows the two sprites to learn from each other very well. Since an apology cannot be obtained, it would be a good thing to let the Pokémon in front of us help our own Pokémon improve for a period of time. Being provoked by Jenger like this makes him feel really aggrieved. Although trainers do sometimes treat their Pokémon like children. Although they are not the same type of Pokémon, Tentacruel and Dragonair are both aquatic Pokémon, and the types of moves they can use are quite similar. Just as he took out the Piquet ball, Jiang Ming quickly took Jenger and Gardevoir and turned to leave. However, most of the time there is still a barrier between elves and humans. After all, they cannot understand each other's languages. Unfortunately, this kind of anger is not very effective in dealing with the situation. Jiang Ming, who had already guessed that the Tentacruel trainer would agree, looked satisfied. He then immediately picked up the Piquet ball in his hand and began to arrange a time and place with the Tentacruel trainer. It just so happens that the stinging jellyfish is indeed quite powerful in combat. After making the decision, Jiang Ming recalled Jenger and Gardevoir. Hakron also needs to make progress in this period. He's already been threatened and cursed. It seems he has no other option but to keep his promise. Although he felt he was facing a very serious threat, the Tentacruel trainer, after comparing the two options, could only nod helplessly to Jiang Ming and agree to Jiang Ming's request for Tentacruel to be his training partner. Knowing that Tentacruel couldn't understand his behavior, Jiang Ming pondered for a moment and finally, somewhat helplessly, put Curlia, who was reluctant to face Tentacruel, back into its Piquet ball and then took out Dragonair's Piquet ball. The difference in their philosophies means that the elves might not be able to understand some of his actions. This lack of understanding made them realize that they couldn't use human standards to measure the situation when facing elves. Furious with resentment over the training, Tentacruel glared angrily at Jiang Ming's retreating figure, then angrily recalled it back into its Piquet ball. However, before taking it back, Jengar maliciously circled around Tentacruel and its trainer, placing a curse on the person. If you don't agree, then I'll have Jengar and Gardevoir kidnap your Pokémon, so your Pokémon will only be training partners for my Pokémon. The Tentacruel trainer was extremely angered by Jiang Ming's action. His handling of such a trivial matter prevented his spirit from improving. Your reaction time is incredible, we didn't even have time to explain the situation to you. Unfortunately, they didn't think Jiang Ming had the ability to escape unscathed. They didn't expect that Jiang Ming would discover them so easily and even work with Hu Ting and Zhang Tian to get them out. Jiang Ming, who had no idea how unwilling the Tentacruel trainer was, left the mall triumphantly with his Pokémon and returned to the place where Hotting had lived before. Zhang Tian and Hu Ting reacted very quickly. While the trainers were still in a daze, they immediately took out the tools they had prepared and tied up the trainers tightly. Then they collected the trainers' Piquet balls. After they were caught, they learned that these trainers were actually the ones Jiang Ming had provoked when he went to the Dongting Lake's secret realm some time ago. They chose to team up and secretly hide in the shadows to see Jiang Ming, just in order to seize this opportunity. Jiang Ming, having acquired so many valuable items, was exceptionally attractive within the hidden realm of Dongting Lake. He chuckled and recounted the preparations they had made recently, then casually addressed Jiang Ming. The work is almost done. We've been staying here these past few days simply to lure out these trainers. Now that we've dealt with the people and handled the matter, we plan to set off tomorrow or the day after. Many trainers who knew that Jiang Ming had actually captured a shiny Magikarp, a rare sight in the Dongting Lake's secret realm, were quite tempted to try their luck with the Pokémon in Jiang Ming's possession. After all, what remains here are mostly trivial matters, nothing major. When he arrived, Hotton had already arranged most of the things. The zero-frame start was very skillful and no one expected Jiang Ming's reaction speed to be so fast. The group of trainers were quickly hypnotized and dazed by Curlia's zero-frame start. If they set up an ambush in advance, Jiang Mingbian may not be able to escape unscathed. For a mercenary, not getting promoted is the biggest setback. He can't afford to delay any longer or his decline will only worsen. In addition, because Jiang Ming looks young, and although his strength is considerable, it has not yet reached the top level, all these factors make them feel that they have a chance to get a shiny Magikarp from Jiang Ming. Only after all the trainers were tied up did Zhang Tian finally exhale a breath of relief and couldn't help but give Jiang Ming a thumbs up. Having just arrived at Hu Ting's place and learned of this news, Jiang Ming naturally couldn't let them escape. Seeing them turn around and try to run away, Jiang Ming immediately threw Cerulean out. The trainers who understood this situation clearly weren't very interested in fighting Jiang Ming. If Jiang Ming hadn't discovered them, they actually planned to attack him directly on his way to the island with Hu Ting and Zhang Tian. The group of trainers who were singled out looked extremely grim, realizing that they were probably no match for Jiang Ming. After all, if they go head-to-head, they might recover or they might not, it's a matter of probability. Curlia, thrown out, stood firmly in front of the trainers, her eyes widening as she activated hypnosis. Knowing that Jiang Ming wasn't particularly interested in the trainers who wanted to snatch the shiny Magikarp, Zhang Tian didn't bother going to make a fool of himself. They had already determined the route Jiang Ming would take while Zhang Tian and the others were discussing the map. Jiang Ming nodded calmly, then glanced at the trainers before asking them about their preparations for going to the island. Meanwhile, Hu Ting and Zhang Tian worked together to find out who the trainers were hiding in the shadows. After all, due to the things that happened along the way, Jiang Ming and Fu Ting had already been delayed for some time, and Zhang Tian didn't really want to keep going through all that trouble. The Chen family members who did not intend to lose the elves had already considered political options when Zhang Tian and Ding rescued them. It would be a huge loss for them to lose their Pokémon for such a small probability. Jiang Ming could still sense Zhang Tian's urgency. It's the kind of sluggishness that makes you unwilling to learn new skills. Since Hotting had already set the departure date for tomorrow or the day after, he didn't think that having to wait until the day after tomorrow was such a difficult thing to do. Thinking about what had happened recently, he was furious with Jiang Ming. Seeing his eagerness to improve, Jiang Ming pondered for a moment and finally gave them a definite answer. He had been firmly controlled by bad luck and had experienced far too much. However, given that Jengar and Gardevoir were watching closely, he could only swallow his anger and resentment. If this Pokémon could evolve into Gyarados, it would definitely be a rather special and desirable Pokémon. Then, obediently, she took the stinging jellyfish next to her and went with Jiang Ming to a nearby swimming area. It's the kind of zombie that you can't save no matter what you do. After confirming that Jiang Ming had matters to attend to the next day, Huo Ting immediately agreed to the departure the day after tomorrow. I have something to do tomorrow, so I probably won't be able to leave with you until the day after tomorrow. After arranging things, Jiang Ming took his playful sprite which he had been happily playing with at the mall and quickly went back to rest. It's clear that both the human and the Pokémon have experienced some unpleasant things because of Jengar's curse. It wasn't until early the next morning that Jiang Ming left with several elves. His complexion wasn't very good. Although he is already a relatively high-level trainer and can be considered outstanding among many trainers, he is still just an ordinary person in the end. The trainer who had just dealt with the Tentacruel immediately retreated a few steps, his eyes brimming with tears. This person kept his word. After promising Jiang Ming that Tentacruel would teach Jiang Ming's Pokémon 10 times, he actually did what he said and obediently brought Tentacruel to Jiang Ming's side. As a rather protective Pokémon, Ghost certainly wouldn't allow its trainer's child to be unable to defeat the enemy, which is why it did that. Hakron already knows he needs to learn some skills from the Tentacruel, so he's taking it quite seriously. Not far from where he left, Jiang Ming spotted the Tentacruel trainer he had threatened at the mall the day before. Now that the other party has fulfilled their promise and obediently come here, Jengar naturally won't do anything too bad to this person. Becoming Magikarp is a bit difficult. Yesterday, Jengar cursed the human and the elf mainly because they were worried that the human and the elf would go back on their word. Hearing the levels of the human and the elf if they wanted to back out, Jiang Ming's side really couldn't do anything about it. Jiang Ming, who didn't really want to threaten the human and the elf in front of him, chuckled and glanced silently at Jengar. However, even in the Magikarp stage, trainers were already frustrated by its lack of potential because this Pokémon was quite dull. Upon arriving there, Jiang Ming immediately took out both his Chucklon and Magikarp. After being cursed by Jengar, he had a lot of bad luck for the next dozen or so hours. Therefore, under Jiang Ming's gaze, Jengar swiftly and decisively broke the curse on the human and the elf. As soon as he finished speaking, the stinging jellyfish beside him angrily lashed out at the ground with its tentacles. Because both of them were relatively accepting of the situation, they quickly arranged everything. As soon as he arrived in front of Jiang Ming, he looked extremely displeased and angrily pointed at the Jengar next to Jiang Ming. Now that I'm here, can't you let this Jengar lift the curse? Although Zhang Tian felt a little upset that Jiang Ming had to delay his departure until the day after tomorrow, it was still within his control. This less-than-ideal situation prompted the stinging jellyfish to try every possible way to improve, but to no avail. For him, he was only forced to bring his own Pokémon to give a proper lesson because he was threatened by Jengar. Dragonair, on the other hand, was incredibly relieved when it learned that it could return to its Picay ball. Jiang Ming, who had initially thought it was because his Pokémon lacked learning ability, raised an eyebrow upon hearing this and finally realized that Tentacruel's teaching method was a bit too strict. That's normal. Strictly speaking, your Pokémon is already much stronger than others. At least from what I've seen, Pokémon from trainers of your level can't last until evening. Most can only last an hour or two before giving up. Although you did cause me some harm, I still want to thank you for this lesson. I can feel that Ha 29 Kron has improved a lot because of this lesson. Now that the teaching is over, their relationship has also ended. He will continue to target Jiang Ming, and he won't let Jiang Ming go as long as he gets the chance. Jiang Ming is finally pleased to see a Pokémon with a 030 rating that is willing to have a proper clash with Magikarp. He is quite interested in seeing what the result of the collision will be. Jiang Ming, who hadn't expected that just one day of training would turn Hakron into this state, touched his nose and said with a touch of helplessness, "A trainer of Tentacruel. Look at this incredibly weak Pokémon." The Tentacruel, unable to succeed from any angle, was clearly furious and, as if it were bad luck, flung out its tentacles, sending the Magikarp, which was relatively close to it, flying a little further away. Seeing that Jiang Ming was focusing his attention on him, he calmly put the Tentacruel into his piquet ball and then spoke indifferently. The enraged Tentacruel then turned its attention to the learner Hackerosaurus. If it really feels uncomfortable, it will just wag its tail and flick a few drops of water, then continue to stay on the surface of the water like an idiot. At first, Jiang Ming didn't notice anything wrong. It wasn't until evening that Hakron, feeling utterly overwhelmed, rushed up to Jiang Ming and sprayed him with water. Only then did Jiang Ming realize that Hakron was experiencing stress related to studying. Despite the Tentacruel's disdain, the Hackerosaurus, which was already learning fast enough, was urged by the Tentacruel to learn even faster. The Magikarp, which had been put away, remained quite indifferent, seemingly unaware that it was receiving a lesson today. However, this joy did not last long because the Tentacruel soon began to complain that the Dragonite's attack power and other aspects were not strong enough. Magikarp is so stupid that it doesn't even fight back when Pokémon attack it. Even with its shiny attribute, the silly Magikarp isn't much better. Seeing the state his Pokémon was in after the lesson, Jiang Ming put away the piquet ball with a wry smile, then looked at the Tentacruel trainer in front of him with a slightly helpless expression. The trainer, who was about to leave with Tentacruel, stopped, seemingly surprised that Jiang Ming would thank him. Compared to Jiang Ming's helplessness, Tentacruel's trainer's expression was much calmer. Under Jiang Ming's curious gaze, the Tentacruel that tried to challenge Magikarp was ultimately defeated. Compared to Magikarp, Dragonair is definitely a very intelligent Pokémon. At least when Tentacruel made some demonstrations, Dragonair was willing to try them. Jiang Ming was quite satisfied with the fight against the Tentacruel since he still didn't really know how to deal with Magikarp. Having confirmed that it wasn't his own Pokémon that was the problem, Jiang Ming chuckled and put away Dragonair and Magikarp. This willingness made the stinging jellyfish, who had just felt somewhat uncomfortable, feel much more relaxed. In the end, Tentacruel seemed to be in a contest and no longer cared about Jiang Ming's earlier threats. It only wanted to teach Magikarp a lesson. But this doesn't mean Jiang Ming would agree to such a request, because Jiang Ming's elf is also a treasure. Jiang Ming, who had no intention of paying any attention to the trainer who was using the stinger jellyfish, casually spread his hands, not intending to discuss with him whether his parents knew about his rather naive nature. Why should the stinging jellyfish have to suffer because it's in a bad mood? The Tentacruel trainer was speechless for a moment, then finally couldn't help but ask, "Do your parents know how naive you are? Ever since my Pokémon was defeated by your Kirlia, I've been holding a grudge and I'm determined to defeat this Kirlia as well." Seeing Tentacruel reappear on the surface of the water, Jiang Ming's expression turned serious. He quickly took out a piquet ball and brought Jengar and Gardevoir with him. Expressing gratitude is his own code of conduct. What the other person actually thinks is not really his concern. Now that the opportunity has finally been found, Tentacruel is naturally unwilling to let this opportunity slip away, which is why it reappeared on the surface of the water just after being recalled by the trainer. Trainers who know their Pokémon well naturally don't want their Pokémon to be upset because of this anxiety. This lack of trust leads many of their trainers to become relatively strong lone wolves. He thought the trainer was planning to attack him, but just as he was about to make his move, the Tentacruel trainer glanced at Tentacruel's movements, then looked helplessly at the piquet ball in Jiang Ming's hand and said, "Could you release that Kirlia?" The Tentacruel trainer probably understood why Jiang Ming was so surprised. Looking at Jiang Ming's serious expression, he sighed helplessly. Jiang Ming, who was considered naive, glanced at him casually, but of course he knew what he was thinking. However, Jiang Ming did not take the matter seriously. Jiang Ming's act of thanking him for such a small thing made him realize that Jiang Ming was indeed naive. He'd said enough, now all he wanted to do was run away. This promise was still very useful to Jiang Ming since he was going to the island with Huo Jiang and Zhang Tian. In their eyes, no trainer is trustworthy. Without hesitation, he shook his head at the trainer in front of him. Your own Pokémon's psychological problems are your own business to solve. It has nothing to do with me. Therefore, he looked at Jiang Ming seriously. As long as you agree to release that Curlia, let it fight Tentacruel properly and resolve the matter cleanly, I can leave you alone afterward. This was none other than the Tentacruel that the trainer had just recalled. Elves don't deal with their own psychological problems. After feeling resentful, Tentacruel became single-mindedly focused on getting rid of Curlia. Trainers at their level have witnessed many trainers fighting over resources. Tentacruel was still resentful about being defeated by such a weak Pokémon. After all, Curlia's level-up abilities are actually quite weak. If it weren't for Jengar, Curlia wouldn't have been able to defeat Tentacruel so easily. As it turns out, he wasn't going to let Jiang Ming off the hook while Jiang Ming was actually planning to let bygones be bygones. Surprisingly, Jiang Ming was actually quite protective of his Pokémon. The trainer raised an eyebrow slightly, glancing hesitantly at the Pokéball on Jiang Ming's body. Jiang Ming was a little surprised by the sudden request. If someone were to lay an ambush along the way, it would indeed waste a lot of his time. However, just as Jiang Ming turned to leave, a ripple suddenly appeared on the water and then 10 familiar elves appeared in front of him. However, given that Curlia has not yet appeared, Tentacruel is feeling a bit uneasy. Once it finally appeared, the Tentacruel's target became clear. It only wanted to attack Curlia, who was standing next to Jiang Ming. With this thought in mind, Jiang Ming turned to look at the two Pokémon accompanying him and spoke directly to the Tentacruel's trainer with a cold smile. Jiang Ming, whose Pokéball was being stared at, hugged the Pokéball in his arms. Knowing full well the sinister intentions of the trainer in front of him, he had no intention of throwing the Pokémon out. The Tentacruel trainer clearly also saw the Jengar and Gardevoir next to Jiang Ming. After an hour or two, the Tentacruel, having calmed down, was already captivated by Curlia. Not only did it treat Curlia much better, but it even took Curlia for a spin on the surface of the water. Curlia seemed quite anxious. Seeing Jengar and Gardevoir about to attack Tentacruel, Curlia nervously ran to Tentacruel and hesitantly patted its tentacles. The two elves looked around as if checking for any danger. Curlia ignored Tentacruel's attitude and seeing that Tentacruel had retracted its tentacles, began to scratch and pull at the ruby on Tentacruel's head. However, if the stalemate continues, he is actually willing to take a gamble. Jiang Ming, who had expected Curlia to be attacked after she appeared, was slightly surprised to see Curlia calmly comforting Tentacruel. His initial wariness slowly subsided in response to Curlia's attitude. It was because of these two elves that he didn't take direct action. But thanks to Kyrol Ryan's reassurance, and perhaps because he felt he had acted too irrationally, he calmed down, starting with the jellyfish. How could Jengar and Gardevoir let this Pokémon run rampant like this? Seeing Tentacruel launch a water gun attack towards Curlia, the two Pokémon immediately rushed towards Tentacruel, determined to teach it a lesson. I wouldn't mind if you wanted to fight. This trainer seemed genuinely just trying to resolve the issue with Tentacruel, and not intending to use this opportunity to make things difficult for Jiang Ming. It was clear that he cared a lot about the stinger jellyfish's mental state, so after Jiang Ming refused, he seemed to want to take action forcefully. Jiang Ming, who was initially worried that the two Pokémon might cause trouble, relaxed a bit after noticing that Tentacruel OK had been captured by Kurigoan and even taken Kurigoan for a ride. He smiled and looked at Tentacruel's trainer. After observing him for a while and confirming that he didn't intend to do anything malicious, Jiang Ming immediately waved to Gardevoir and Jengar. Curlia, who is generally good-natured, treated Tentacruel very well. Initially, Tentacruel did act somewhat aggressively towards Curlia because it was angry. The Tentacruel's trainer clearly knew that today's battle was unlikely to take place. Seeing the two Pokémon become friends in just an hour or two, he was somewhat annoyed by his Pokémon's lack of effort, but ultimately he could only reluctantly recall the Tentacruel into its Pokéball and leave. Meanwhile, under the watchful eyes of Jiang Ming and the trainers, Curlia was in excellent condition and had established a friendly relationship with Tentacruel. Just as he hesitated, the piquet ball in Jiang Ming's hand suddenly moved. Curlian then emerged from the piquet ball. After relaxing, Jiang Ming turned his attention to the trainer of the Tentacruel. "It seems we won't be fighting today. When do you plan to leave with your Pokémon?" However, just as the two Pokémon were about to rush towards Tentacruel, Curlia's voice came from that moment. Seeing Curlia suddenly appear, Tentacruel, which was underwater, immediately raised its tentacles and fired 10 water jets at Curlia. After a while, the two Pokémon, having determined that there was no major danger, returned to Jiang Ming's side and kept a close eye on Curlia. Therefore, seeing that Kuryuan treated Tentacruel very well and even began to comfort it, the trainer did not do anything else but just watched quietly from the side. The stinging jellyfish, clearly upset by the tap on its tentacles, immediately retracted them. Right now, all he wants to do is use Jengar to summon Gardevoir to solve this problem. Jiang Ming didn't care whether the Tentacruel trainer left satisfied or dissatisfied. Seeing that the other party had left with the piquet ball, Jiang Ming quickly recalled all his Pokémon and also left the place, returning to his residence. As soon as he got back, Jiang Ming saw several trainers discussing something. Hu Ting and Zhang Tian have clearly become the leaders among these trainers. When Jiang Ming arrived, the two elders were whispering about the follow-up arrangements. As Jiang Ming arrived, Zhang Tian took the lead and walked towards him, placing a marked map in front of him without hesitation. At this moment, Hu Ting took the map and began to seriously discuss their trip to the island with Jiang Ming. During the time they delayed, news of the many good things on the island had gradually spread. Because such news comes out almost every year, some trainers naturally don't take the island seriously. However, some novice trainers or trainer teams specifically formed for Pokémon might want to check it out. In that chaotic environment where you can find good things without spending a lot of money, they will face quite a few enemies this time. However, most of the time, the enemies were unsure how much good stuff was on the island, so they wouldn't act rashly. This has led to a situation where, although the booking side knows it has many competitors, it doesn't feel particularly nervous. He simply pointed out a few dangerous locations on the map and then casually spoke to Jiang Ming. "If we encounter some powerful wild Pokémon later, we might be able to cooperate with other trainers. So before we are sure which trainers are aggressive, we don't need to take the initiative." Jiang Ming was quite satisfied with Huo Ting's idea. He doesn't really like competing with trainers. Now that it's certain that most trainers are an unknown number, Jiang Ming's side really doesn't want to be the first to make a move. Zhang Tian's expression was a bit strange when he heard these words. He didn't think his other competitors would be so mild. Because of this lack of confidence, Zhang Tian was still tightly gripping his piquet ball, showing that he was very wary of encountering a competitor this time. Having already learned some of Zhang Tian's identity while in the Dongting Lake's secret realm, Jiang Ming didn't think much of his wariness. After glancing casually at Zhang Tian, he continued his discussion with Huo Ting. The discussion didn't last long as night fell and everyone needed more time to rest. So an hour later, Jiang Ming and the others went back to their rooms to rest. After resting until the next morning, Jiang Ming took the elf and left the house that Huo Ding had rented. The trainers who were with Hotten had already been waiting outside. After confirming that Jiang Ming was also fine, the group of trainers quickly drove up in 10 cars and began the riddle. The path forward was relatively smooth, although Jiang Ming and his group did see some trainers nearby heading towards the same destination as them. However, just as Hotting said, the other trainers were still unsure whether they were enemies or friends, so everyone was cautious and did not launch an attack. This cautious atmosphere persisted until a day later when they reached the outskirts of the island. It was a small island built in the middle of the lake and they would need to change boats to get in. The cautious atmosphere was broken just as the trainers around were changing their tools. Zhang Tian's giant butterfly was attacked. The butterfly that attacked Zhang Tian was a group of trainers who came in droves. These trainers seemed to have a past grudge against Zhang Tianyu. However, it's clear that the team of trainers who attacked Zhang Tian didn't have that intention. You reacted quickly. To be honest, if I didn't know you were a student, I would have wanted you to join me as a mercenary. With your abilities, you would definitely make a name for yourself as a mercenary very quickly. To this end, Jiang Ming also released his other Pokémon one after another, directing them to increase their battle experience. They really had no way to escape. Hakurin, which can be more effective in water, immediately surfaced and launched an attack on the Pokémon on the shore without hesitation. After offering such a compliment, Zhang Tian didn't waste any more words and immediately unleashed his strongest combat forces. He wasn't flustered after throwing it out. After all, Jiang Ming still had a Jengar and a Gardevoir in his hand. So since he already has a backup plan, he doesn't need to take it too seriously. These two Pokémon are considered to be Jiang Ming's backup, so Zhang Tian knew that Jiang Ming would definitely not reveal his trump cards casually. So when Huo Ting saw Zhang Tian being attacked, he actually led his team to retreat. Jiang Ming, who hadn't originally planned to get involved in these feuds, looked at the group of elves who had suddenly appeared with a serious expression and couldn't help but turn his gaze to Ting. Sensing Huo Ting's dissatisfaction with the matter, Jiang Ming chuckled, understanding that Huo Ting was telling the truth. If they don't attack Jiang Ming or Huo Ting, they are very likely to be attacked by Jiang Ming and his group instead. Jiang Ming, who saw Zhang Tian's action, naturally knew what he was thinking, but he had to admit that his thoughts were the same as Zhang Tian's. Since there was no other way, Jiang Ming naturally didn't mind taking direct action. Jiang Ming didn't really want to get involved in this feud. Taking advantage of the relaxed environment, Jiang Ming immediately brought his elf to Foster's side. The somewhat enclosed environment became much more relaxed after Jiang Ming's action. Seeing the group of elves suddenly surrounding them, Huo Ting's face turned extremely grim as he said to Jiang Ming, "We probably have no way to escape." Since he already had an elf to lie in behind his back, he certainly couldn't let this golden opportunity slip away. Perhaps because they were on a team, they also considered Jiang Ming and Zhang Tian to be on a team. The group of Pokémon that originally planned to gather around Jiang Ming and attack him were caught off guard by Riolu. The two Pokémon were quite powerful in battle, but in a short time, the Pokémon gathered around Jiang Ming began to retreat gradually because of Jiang Ming's actions. But if something really goes wrong on their side, the two elves certainly won't stand idly by. At that moment, Zhang Tian threw his Pokéball and gave Jiang Ming a thumbs up in satisfaction. "Please give me flowers." When Jiang Ming first saw that Zhang Tian had a long-standing grudge against them, he wanted to move his elf to the side first. After all, they were just a temporary team, and there was no need to cause trouble for a trainer with whom he didn't have a particularly good relationship. He suddenly threw Hakron into the water. Taking advantage of the moment when they were caught off guard, Jiang Ming immediately healed Lucario and Nidoking. Point 0. Zhang Tian, who had no intention of taking things too seriously, commanded his Pokémon, intending to use this opportunity to improve its strength. To avoid being attacked after attacking Zhang Tian's Butterfree, they immediately threw out Pokéballs to surround Jiang Minghuoting's team. Huo Ting's attitude just now was actually the same as his. Neither of them really wanted to get involved in certain matters as a minister. He never imagined that while he wanted to evacuate, those people wouldn't allow him to. With these words, the other innocent trainers quickly turned their attention to the trainer who was dueling with Jiang Ming. Because they were the real culprits, a group of trainers who were caught in the crossfire and felt resentful quickly headed straight for them. In other words, the culprits this time are definitely these trainers who started the trouble. Seeing that they were about to take out their Pokémon for water combat, Jiang Ming decided to call it quits while he was ahead. Under Jiang Ming's gaze, the trainers who were already standing with him immediately took out their Pokémon. On land, there are Jiang Ming and other trainers' Pokémon, while underwater there is a Dragonair that often stirs up trouble. In this chaotic battle, because most Pokémon were on land and not many were underwater, the underwater Hakodra achieved a great victory. After all, they are not without eyes. But in reality, it was those trainers who attacked Zhang Tian's Butterfree first, which led to the current situation. Seeing that Dragonair was unable to return to Jiang Ji's Pokéball because of the appearance of those Pokémon and could only race against them in the water, Jiang Ming glanced at the other trainers around him. Soon, the battle spread from the land to the water. Although he was very arrogant, he used a 1.6 level underwater Dragonair to fight other Pokémon on land, which angered the other trainers. Several trainers who initially didn't really want to participate in the battle were clearly becoming extremely upset due to the ripples. One of the girls suddenly stood on the yacht and expressed strong condemnation of Jiang Ming and the other trainers for their extremely unethical practice of fighting underwater. Because they knew this, they naturally knew that Jiang Ming was indeed alright this time. They are quite clear about why things turned out this way in the first place. Seeing that Jiang Ming's Dragonair was still running rampant, while their own Pokémon were becoming increasingly irritated by Dragonair's harassment, the trainers finally couldn't resist taking out their own underwater Pokémon. Jiang Ming, having received this condemnation, silently glanced at Hakron, who was still under siege and hadn't yet escaped the attack, and helplessly spread his hands. So just as Jiang Ming was about to call it quits, these trainers swiftly intercepted his attempt and sent his Pokémon into the water. The trainers looked at Jiang Ming with complicated expressions, truly not expecting him to be so cunning. However, since they had already arrived at the island, it was impossible for them not to have a decent underwater creature. Unfortunately, his speed was clearly not as fast as those trainers. A group of trainers who were being harassed by Jiang Ming were probably holding back too much anger. The underwater battle was extremely fierce, and trainers who were planning to take a boat to the island were all affected by the fierce battle. I also want my Pokémon to stop, but right now my Pokémon is under attack, and even if I take out the Pokéball, my Pokémon can't come back. As they moved, a Riolu that was enjoying itself underwater was suddenly attacked by a group of aquatic sprites. The land-based elves, on the other hand, felt increasingly annoyed because of Riolu's cleverness. You guys are fighting, so why are you involving us trainers who are innocent? Unable to bear the harassment any longer, the group of Pokémon angrily returned to their 787 trainer. Fortunately, it wasn't just those trainers who had underwater Pokémon. Basically, all the trainers who came here had prepared a few underwater Pokémon. It will only attack all the surrounding spirits equally. Once you have enough experience, Magikarp can evolve into Gyarados. Jiang Ming, who had quickly retrieved Hakron, exhaled a breath of stale air. Because there were no other Pokémon to block its path and Dragonair no longer needed to spend a lot of time dodging, the Pokéball successfully captured Dragonair this time. Since they can no longer produce it, these culprits will naturally not suffer any losses. Seeing that Magikarp had drawn the attention of all the Pokémon, Jiang Ming quickly threw a Pokéball at Dragonair, which was swimming rapidly toward him. Because of the strong impact from Magikarp, the other Pokémon were quickly drawn to its attention. To avoid being caught off guard by an information gap, Jiang Ming focused intently and, taking advantage of the Pokémon's attack on Dragonair, immediately threw the Magikarp he had been holding. While it's certainly a cause for celebration that these culprits have been targeted by other trainers, most of the time, trainers who come here to search for treasure don't like to cause trouble. Fortunately, Jiang Ming only had one Pokémon, Dragonair, which was now surrounded by the other Pokémon because it was being attacked by them. With no other options, Jiang Ming could only helplessly begin to give commands to the Magikarp that had been thrown out and was still sitting blankly on the surface of the water. Zhang Tian smirked, surprised that Magikarp could be used in such a clever way. He was quite impressed by Jiang Ming's effortless use of a useless Pokémon. Although it's a bit slow and mostly lacks the ability to attack, Magikarp is still obedient. Most of the time, this silly elf just wags its tail and splashes water underwater, unable to do anything else. Not wanting to cause trouble or prematurely deplete their fighting strength, they could at most condemn the culprits but couldn't do anything more. In this situation, if Jiang Ming's attention is diverted, the final goal may not be achieved, and he may even overlook Hakron's condition because of the inability to achieve the goal. However, due to the presence of enemies nearby, although Zhang Wei was very envious of Jiang Ming's easy use of Magikarp, he ultimately held onto the wind ball and stared at the enemy. 14,402,422, Feilu 210,562,390. Unfortunately, no matter how little he expected, he didn't have many Pokémon that could attack underwater, and Dragonair was already trapped by so many other Pokémon. Magikarp wasn't particularly agile to begin with, and under Jiang Ming's actions, the Pokémon didn't even have a chance to dodge before being captured and put into its Pokéball. That will be the real shining moment for this shiny Magikarp. Neither side was willing to back down. Magikarp used Tackle on them. Jiang Ming put the carp ball on his hand, simply hoping that the spirit would attack the spirit with a needle to gain some experience. Before the flash, Jiang Ming's side didn't have high expectations for this Magikarp. If it weren't for the enemy being right next to him, he would have already been itching to discuss with Jiang Ming some of Jiang Ming's experiences using elves. The middle is a place where you are not easily hurt. Jiang Ming, extremely satisfied, threw his piquet ball towards Magikarp again. Jiang Ming's attention was not diverted by the trainer's actions. Therefore, Magikarp's attack did not reach the central Dragonair area, it only attacked the outer perimeter of the other Pokémon. At Jiang Ming's request, Magikarp didn't even bother to see which Pokémon would be hit by the collision attack. Magikarp isn't really a Pokémon that's well suited for battle since it looks rather dull. Having successfully rescued his two Pokémon, Jiang Ming, unwilling to let the situation escalate further, calmly led Jengar and Gardevoir to retrieve all their prepared items, deciding to be the first to land on the island. In this situation, he had no choice but to throw Magikarp out. Therefore, flying sprites are only a safeguard for them, not a solution to the problem. Jiang Ming does not plan to use the Arrowhawk unless absolutely necessary. Seeing that an innocent trainer had already encountered problems, the two trainers quickly led their companions to Jiang Ming's side and surrounded him. If Gardevoir had remained serious throughout, after hearing Jiang Ming's words, she probably understood that Jiang Ming was being wary of the trainers, so she immediately gave Jiang Ming a serious nod. Jiang Ming was quite clever. Hearing Zhang Tian say that, he stopped talking nonsense and took out the Talonflame's Piquet Ball. However, in a short period of time, all the trainers who were originally causing chaos outside the island gradually appeared on the lake. Upon hearing this, Jiang Ming looked at him with a puzzled expression, not quite understanding what he meant. They then began to look warily at their enemies. Jengar casually floated up on the yacht and glanced at the trainers behind Jiang Ming, clearly not taking them seriously. Subsequently, the trainers who were still on the lake were affected one after another, and some trainers were even overturned into the lake because they could not stay still. Both sides, who were unwilling to let go of each other because of their grudges, quickly stopped their grudges when they saw Jiang Ming's action. Gardevoir then began to keep a close eye on what was behind it. Several unstable enemies even fell into the water as a result. After all, their original goal in coming here was to find the good stuff on the island. It has to be said that Jiang Ming's decision was quite correct. He then looked at Jiang Ming with a serious expression. We're in the middle of the lake now and the current is quite large. The chances of reaching Xiaoniao quickly are not very high. If they are still dealing with their grudges while Jiang Ming has already taken all the good stuff from the island, then they've really lost out. However, this action did not last long. Just as they were moving forward, a series of ripples suddenly came from underwater. If a flying sprite is carrying a person, it is even less certain that it will be able to fly over. Zhang Tian, who had assumed it was his enemy who had caused the trouble, looked at the group of people with a face full of surprise. To avoid significant losses, the group grabbed their belongings and hurriedly began making preparations without saying a word. Jiang Ming, who was walking at the front, calmly glanced at the group of trainers who were unwilling to give him any great benefits. He put Gardevoir and Jengar aside with a speechless expression, staring at the small island not far away while muttering to himself. Zhang Tian and Hu Ting reacted very quickly, assuming that the trainers who had a grudge against them had deliberately set some traps here. However, Jiang Ming did not immediately throw out the fiery arrow eagle. The lake was very large, and if he used a flying sprite, the opponent might not be able to fly over the entire lake. The group of trainers who had no idea what was going on were completely bewildered. Zhang Tian, of course, understood Jiang Ming's attitude. He nodded at Jiang Ming with great understanding, then looked seriously at the water. Zhang Tian could clearly see Jiang Ming's confusion, so he stopped talking nonsense, took out his Piquet ball and threw it into the water while speaking seriously to Jiang Ming. I remember you have a flamingo hawk. If we can't get to the island from the water, we'll have to go in from the air. While they were watching warily, their enemies were also affected. It seems these trainers will definitely continue to target us in the future, so you too better watch out. As he stared intently at the water, Jiang Ming also took out Hakron. But Jiang Ming had a keen eye and realized almost immediately what Blastoise was up to. At the same moment they took out the spirits, a slight sound came from underwater. This allure led many trainers to take out their Piquet balls to capture Blastoise, and then began to watch other trainers closely, trying to prevent them from capturing this powerful Pokémon. Trainers around them who were being attacked by water guns reacted quickly, easily dodging the attack from the not-so-agile Pokémon by simply moving aside. Seeing the trainers around it eyeing it menacingly, Blastoise, which wasn't exactly known for its good temper, slowly turned around, probably sensing danger. Of all his Pokémon, only Riolu is well suited to the current situation. The trainers who had been taking out their Piquet balls one after another quickly retreated. When they saw the huge Pokémon clearly, all the trainers' eyes lit up. However, this kind of damage is not unavoidable. The trainers were still holding each other back and unwilling to let the other trainers recall Blastoise, so they didn't notice Blastoise's action. Seeing Jiang Ming's somewhat peculiar movements, Zhang Tian frowned slightly, suddenly realizing that his assessment of Jiang Ming wasn't entirely accurate. Huo Ting was the first to react, looking at Jiang Ming with slight surprise, clearly not expecting Jiang Ming to take the initiative to back down. But after dodging the water, these trainers who had initially been reluctant to stay due to the effects of the water were now unwilling to leave. Knowing that Dragonair was also clearly interested in Blastoise, Jiang Ming patted Dragonair's Piquet ball reassuringly, then quickly steered his yacht to a safer area. Jiang Ming, who didn't particularly like being passive, hesitated for a moment. Seeing that none of the trainers around him dared to throw their Pokémon out, he helplessly tossed the Dragonair into the water. This is actually a giant Blastoise. Its enormous size, impressive level, and immense combat power make it incredibly attractive to any trainer looking to improve themselves. He frowned slightly and leaned closer to Zhang Tian with a hint of helplessness. A child is still a child. I don't think he's particularly willing to take risks. If there are any dangerous actions later, we should prepare in advance. Now that Huo Ting had said that, he realized that Jiang Ming had actually left far away. This Blastoise doesn't seem to have a particularly good temperament. As soon as it surfaced, it launched a water gun attack on several trainers nearby. With Jiang Ming taking the lead, the extremely vigilant trainers around them exchanged glances. This is a wild Blastoise. The captured Dragonair was eager to pounce, seemingly unwilling to let Blastoise go so easily. Then a giant elf emerged from the water. Because he was trying to capture Blastoise, he had no time to pay attention to Jiang Ming. Blastoise's water gun attack, being much larger, is naturally more damaging than those of smaller Pokémon. Amidst their menacing actions, Jiang Ming's gaze fell upon Blastoise. Zhang Tian was one of the trainers who tried to catch Blastoise. This sprite, which wasn't particularly good-tempered, naturally couldn't stay still and obediently on the water's surface. Because everyone around was fighting over Blastoise, Jiang Ming's decision to withdraw seemed quite abrupt. Finally, they obediently brought out the spirits they could use in the water. Seeing that Blastoise was clearly going to attack, he didn't plan to try and catch it like the other trainers. Instead, he quickly defeated the Dragonair in the water. Although it was restless, its attacks were much weaker. Sensing their anticipation, Jiang Ming silently watched the Blastoise, which had already disappeared into the water, but did not intend to launch another attack at this moment. With Jiang Ming's arrangements and the other trainers' willingness to cooperate, their attack this time was both safe and swift. To avoid unnecessary losses during their capture of Blastoise, countless training sessions began to gradually cease. However, if they relentlessly continue to attack Blastoise until it feels its life is threatened, then even with severe consequences, the Pokémon will choose to launch a final attack to protect its life. These trainers may not be as strong as Blastoise for now, but if several trainers who are not as strong as Blastoise are put together, their strength and physical attributes can be comparable. Seeing that the attack was effective, many trainers who had followed Jiang Ming's instructions immediately lit up and looked at Jiang Ming with some excitement. With our current strength, we absolutely cannot defeat this spirit. Now that the water has calmed down, I strongly suggest you leave here and go to the island as soon as possible. Jiang Ming, who had noticed something was wrong beforehand and hid to the side, had become the commander-in-chief of their operation. Every Pokémon has a temper. Now that they've attacked Blastoise, Blastoise doesn't plan to retaliate because it knows that if it does, it will suffer serious consequences. Since they had already discovered such a special Pokémon, it would be a waste not to capture it quickly. Tang Ran's decision to hide would be a bit too ambitious and diminish their own prestige. Many trainers who were eager to resolve the Blastoise issue quickly under Jiang Ming's arrangement naturally stopped wasting time and promptly took out their Pokéballs. Seeing this scene from a distance, Jiang Ming couldn't help but feel fortunate that he had noticed Blastoise's strange behavior early on and had run to a safe place beforehand. After all, the combat strength of the trainers around is what it is, and the trainers who can come to the island to explore are basically well prepared. After feeling relieved, Jiang Ming solemnly took out his megaphone and shouted to Yu Ting and the others in front of him, "First, hide in a safe place. After this elf's agitated state subsides, then you can attack it." With this considerable ability, Jiang Ming made one command after another, and in a short period of time, Blastoise obediently hid underwater because of the attack. Blastoise's sudden attack was quite dangerous. None of the trainers around had expected Blastoise to attack, so when Blastoise's water gun came at them, almost all of them fell into the water without exception. Blastoise, which was initially attacking the trainers on the surface of the water, became even more agitated due to the combined attack from these trainers. But now things are different. Given that Blastoise has launched an attack and many trainers have indeed been attacked and thrown into the water by Blast, because they are not as strong as it is, these trainers have finally realized that they cannot completely defeat Blastoise in the short term. If Jiang Ming had said those words from the beginning, both Hoding and the other trainers would have treated him like a coward. Thinking about the consequences of pushing Blastoise to that point, Jiang Ming looked at the trainers who were still itching to act with a headache and immediately shook his head at them. However, before he could give Jiang Ming a new evaluation, the Blastoise that they had been eyeing so intently suddenly launched an attack. During their retreat, Jiang Ming, seeing Blastoise still in a rage, immediately began directing the other trainers to bring out their Pokémon to attack Blastoise. They had initially thought Jiang Ming was someone who could completely subdue Blastoise, but it turned out he was just someone who wanted to resolve the immediate crisis. After making his wishes, Jiang Ming quickly led a group of elves directly towards the island. At the same moment, Jiang Ming stared, a huge pool of water suddenly appeared and began to spin on the waterway he hadn't walked on. The fiery arrow eagle, which had been brought out in advance, knew clearly that it was the last guarantee to get Jiang Ming onto the island. After being thrown out, the fierce eagle immediately flew towards Jiang Ming. Just as the trainers were screaming in panic, Jiang Ming, after squeezing the Pokéball a few times, slowly walked forward and spoke to the trainers underwater. "I have a way to rescue you, but you must agree to some conditions." But Blastoise isn't something they can eliminate in a short time. Unfortunately, it was no longer of much use because Jiang Ming's side had already landed on the island while they could only stay underwater because of the Blastoise. Standing on the island, Jiang Ming calmly watched the panicked trainers, then glanced at Jengar and Gardevoir beside him. The trainers around him, who had initially thought Jiang Ming was a complete coward, finally realized his vigilance amidst the fierce attacks. Jiang Ming, who could clearly see that Blastoise was becoming enraged because of these trainers, did not intend to get involved. Jiang Ming's words were clearly not what those trainers wanted to hear. They are still ordinary people, and their lives would be threatened if they stayed in the water for too long. Jiang Ming, who was still kind-hearted, considered the costs of the subsequent battle and had an idea in mind about how to win this battle. Then they took out several more water sprites, scaring the sprites into throwing them into the water. The inability to land on the island and obtain any benefits is no longer the most important thing to them. With their lives threatened and unable to deal with the Pokémon that was causing them the trouble, a group of trainers began to panic on the water. However, it was just an idea. He didn't intend to help those people directly at this time. He had thought of most of what he needed to think about. Since these trainers weren't afraid of death, he could only wish them good luck. Although no one said it openly, everyone knew that once they arrived on this island, they were competitors. 1.8. Although he was kind, Jiang Ming was definitely not unconditionally kind. He casually squeezed the Poké ball in his hand. Most importantly, although trainers undergo special training, it does not mean they have transcended the human body. Without further ado, Jiang Ming quickly jumped onto Talonflame's back with Jengar and Gardevoir and then followed Talonflame onto the island. If they don't deal with the angry Blastoise now, none of them will be able to land on the island. Once he landed completely on the island's land, Jiang Ming looked at the section of waterway he hadn't traveled earlier with a serious expression. Jengar and Gardevoir are definitely much stronger in battle than Blastoise, so as long as he throws these two Pokémon out and lets other Pokémon help create an atmosphere suitable for their battle, he can definitely win this battle. As they approached the island, Jiang Ming stopped the yacht and threw out the fiery arrow eagle. The trainers, who were somewhat unhappy with Jiang Ming's handling of the situation, stopped arguing and immediately took out their Poké balls to continue their attack underwater. Then, an enraged Blastoise rose from the water and launched a fierce attack on the trainers who were still on the surface. If he unconditionally helps these competitors, he will only be retaliated against by them in the end. Because of their relentless attacks, the water around 697 began to become murky, and the Blastoise underwater also began to become agitated due to the trainers' persistent attacks. At this point, even the most skilled trainers would know that if they didn't agree to Jiang Ming's conditions, they might not be able to be rescued. Therefore, when Jiang Ming made his conditional offer, almost all the trainers agreed in unison. Having already guessed that they would inevitably respond, Jiang Ming turned to look at Jengar and spoke to them. As long as you promise not to harm my group during the rest of the bird-themed trip, I guarantee your safe arrival on the island. This is definitely a relatively low requirement for these trainers. Although everyone is a competitor, sometimes it's okay not to compete. 22. Not targeting Jiang Ming's team would at most mean just avoiding them. Therefore, this group of people naturally had no problems. Some people even waved frantically at Jiang Ming, saying, "You can say whatever you want, just don't waste time, get us out of here first." Seeing their urgency, Jiang Ming chuckled and turned his gaze to Zhang Tian by the window. These two probably thought that as their teammates they would definitely rescue them until they reached Gate E. Sensing Jiang Ming's gaze, the two of them immediately stared intently at him. Jiang Ming sighed helplessly and said to the two without hesitation, "I need you to promise not to cause any more trouble in the future." They probably didn't expect Jiang Ming to want them to make a guarantee, but Fu Ting and Zhang Tian didn't intend to cause trouble, so they nodded indifferently after hearing this. Having confirmed that all the trainers were alright, Jiang Ming stopped wasting time and threw the Poké ball out of his hand. Just as Blastoise reacted quickly and tried to attack his Poké ball, Jengar sped past Jiang Ming. Sensing Jengar's action, Jiang Ming quickly threw out several Pokémon and then swiftly used other Poké balls to retrieve them back into their Poké balls. The sudden appearance of the Pokémon and its sudden disappearance left Blastoise somewhat bewildered. Taking advantage of Blastoise's momentary confusion, Jengar swiftly approached Blastoise and launched an attack. Blastoise, after being attacked, realized that it had been tricked by Jiang Ming. Although not very agile, Blastoise is still very aggressive. In a fit of rage, it decided to roll around on the water. The trainers around certainly wouldn't dare let Blastoise roll around there, especially since they were still in the water. If Blastoise were to actually roll around in the water, all of them, the trainers, would be overturned. Just as they were hurriedly trying to tell Jiang Ming to think of another solution, Gardevoir next to Jiang Ming launched an attack on Blastoise. Blastoise would have no chance to react if Gardevoir launched an attack. Just then, Jengar was on Blastoise's back, and taking advantage of Gardevoir's attack, Jengar launched an attack on Blastoise's back as well. The two attacks hit Blastoise simultaneously, causing it to stiffen slightly. Taking advantage of its momentary lapse in concentration, Gardevoir launched another attack. Jengar cooperated very well, and while Gardevoir launched its attack, Jengar kept pushing half of Blastoise's body underwater. The combined attack of the two Pokémon was very effective. After a few attacks, Blastoise, which had been holding one side of its body down by Jengar, was flipped over by the attacks. It was only then that the Blastoise, lying on its back and belly up, realized that Jiang Ming didn't actually want to kill it. He simply wanted to flip it over so it couldn't get up and attack its enemies. Unable to face him directly, Jiang Ming could only steel himself and approach Blastoise, speaking to the trainers underwater who were already somewhat bewildered by his actions. Looking at the trembling ground, Jiang Ming's expression became serious. Once the trainers were certain that the Blastoise next to them wouldn't pose any further threat, they hurriedly directed their Pokémon to help pack up their equipment for landing on the island. "What are you waiting for? Let's go to the island." Trainers who already knew that this small island was likely to produce some powerful Pokémon were extremely vigilant and dared not relax their guard in the slightest. To avoid such difficulties, those trainers took it very seriously. The newly emerged Wartortle has a clear goal to get close to Blastoise. It must be said that this plan is quite useful. At least for now, it is indeed temporarily unable to turn around and launch an attack on Jiang Ming's side. Then, a group of Wartortles launched a water gun attack on Jiang Ming and the other trainers in perfect unison. Blastoise, who never expected Jiang Ming to be so treacherous, looked at Jiang Ming with a sad expression and cried out again and again, stretching its somewhat old neck. After all, although they had entered this small island, they were not planning to leave. He thought that by reducing his presence, the Wartortles wouldn't notice them. The group of trainers, who were initially surprised by Jiang Ming's actions and had no intention of going to the island, quickly and obediently boarded the island after hearing Jiang Ming's words. Most of these undamaged spirits are not very strong in combat, but they can still do some things within a safe range. A group of carnivorous turtles were seen running out from behind various trees on the island. The attack was truly unexpected. The trainers around them all thought they had escaped safely, but who would have thought that they would be attacked and reduced to this state by this group of fish just seconds after escaping danger? Taking advantage of their focused moment, Jiang Ming quickly recalled his Pokémon, intending to leave first and explore the island. As they remained vigilant, the culprit that caused the ground to tremble gradually revealed its true nature. But just as he was minimizing his presence and trying to leave with the other trainers, the camos suddenly seemed to realize something and all looked towards Jiang Ming. His words clearly served as a wake-up call for the group of trainers. Without these yachts and equipment, they would have had a hard time leaving, let alone contacting anyone outside. Although he couldn't understand what Blastoise was saying, Jiang Ming clearly knew that the Pokémon was condemning him. He awkwardly touched his nose and didn't dare to face the Pokémon. The trainers who had just run back to land from the water were also looking around in a panic, completely unexpected that so many things would happen in such a short time since they arrived on this small island. After landing on the island, the trainers quickly released their Pokémon that had not yet been damaged in the battle and could move freely in the water. Completely ignored, Jiang Ming and the other trainers slowly reduced their presence. However, just as Jiang Ming was about to take action, the ground suddenly rumbled. Jiang Ming, who had taken relatively few hits, looked at the unwilling trainers with a headache. He hid behind a tree and spoke to the group of trainers not far away. "This time it's probably Blastoise's trick, otherwise these Wartortles wouldn't be so uniform. Next, you must follow my instructions and attack that Blastoise with me." The trainers, caught in the attack, could only dodge left and right, and some even couldn't help but roar in frustration at the Pokémon. Because his goal was so clear, Jiang Mingfu completely ignored the other trainers. If Jiang Ming, who was still on the water, had said these words, the trainers would definitely not have agreed. Even if they had, they would have had ulterior motives. Because in their eyes, Jiang Ming was indeed very young and had not yet shown anything significant. But they are different now. They have now been tempered by Blastoise. Having already known that Jiang Ming was the one who could anticipate Blastoise's plan, they nodded to him without hesitation. Having determined that these trainers were relatively obedient, Jiang Ming brought out 2 Pokémon that he had brought from his parents and then gave an order. "Bring out all your land-based attack Pokémon and attack that Blastoise that's been flipped over." Jiang Ming's order was quite effective. The trainers around him, who were already quite obedient, immediately brought out their Pokémon that could be used for accounting purposes. Some Pokémon were damaged in the battle, and the trainers thoughtfully used aerial Pokémon to help them. With such considerate treatment from Assay, Blastoise, which was already unable to attack due to being flipped over, was quickly rendered helpless. Although it was beaten into submission, Blastoise was tough and resilient, so these Pokémon didn't have much of an impact on it. At best, it's just something that makes it feel like it's illegal or something like that. The trainers around could also see that Blastoise was not greatly affected by these Pokémon. The group of Wartortles continued their attacks on Blastoises because Blastoises hadn't suffered any major damage. This vicious cycle is not actually beneficial to them. Trainers who didn't want to waste too much time here turned to look at Jiang Ming. Having already guessed that these trainers definitely had something in mind, Jiang Ming calmly called Jengar and Gardevoir out. Unlike other trainers of similar rank, Jengar and Gardevoir are his parents' Pokémon, and the trainers of these two Pokémon are at the near elite level or even elite level. Given their respective levels, these two elves couldn't possibly be weak. The attacks from Jengar and Gardevoir, who are by no means weak and could even overwhelm any trainer here, are not so easy to withstand. Under the powerful attack of the two Pokémon, Blastoise, which had been completely unperturbed because the trainer's attacks were not strong enough, was now in a state of complete panic. It is now immobile and unable to resist, while the group of Wartortles it summoned lacks offensive power. The water guns that were left there for so long have only given these trainers and Pokémon a bath. Faced with this contrast, Blastoise couldn't help but panic and let out another cry towards Jiang Ming. However, compared to its somewhat threatening calls at the beginning, the Blastoise's calls are now much gentler, as if it is begging for mercy. Perhaps worried that its voice was too loud, Blastoise deliberately lowered its voice considerably when begging for mercy. Jiang Ming might not know what Blastoise was saying, but he could tell from the sound that the Pokémon was no longer dangerous. Although he could tell from their expressions, Jiang Ming didn't intend to let Jengar and Gardevoir back so easily. Nobody knows whether Blastoise's actions are a temporary measure or what it plans to do. Even though Jiang Ming realized that Blastoise was willing to reconcile, he only told Jengar and Gardevoir to stop attacking. The Pokémon did not return but remained there watching Blastoise intently. The Blastoise, being stared at, cried out in an increasingly pitiful voice. The trainers around were drawn to the pitiful cries. One of them, probably kind-hearted, looked at Jiang Ming cautiously when he saw Blastoise in such a state. It's clear they hope Jiang Ming will let Blastoise go. After all, it is currently unable to move and has no way to attack Jiang Ming's side. If those Wartortles leave, it will have no one to protect it. The trainers also knew that staying here would not do them any good, and there was even a high possibility that some unexpected accidents would occur. Blastoise, who had been hesitant and was about to agree, became even more hesitant after hearing Jiang Ming's words. It's probably because Jengar and Gardevoir's combined attack is really powerful that Blastoise is now panicking whenever it sees Jengar and Gardevoir. Jiang Ming wasn't a ruthless person, so naturally he wouldn't kill Blastoise just because of some previous disagreements. Upon seeing Jiang Ming arrive, Blastoise struggled to move, but because it had been flipped over, no matter how much it moved, it was of little use. Seeing Jiang Ming push Jengar out, Blastoise panicked and cried out at Jiang Ming, seemingly not understanding what Jiang Ming wanted to do. To avoid such danger, the trainers around looked at Jiang Ming with a serious expression when they heard his words, hoping that he would not do such a thing. Now that he was certain that the Pokémon genuinely wanted to reconcile with him, Jiang Ming hesitated for a moment before finally approaching Blastoise. To avoid being in danger due to the lack of Pokémon protection, Blastoise was unwilling to let the group of succulents leave. Once Jiang Ming was certain that Blastoise was unable to move, he chuckled and began to squat down next to Blastoise, talking to it about reconciliation. It must be said that this threat was quite effective. Jiang Ming grinned, clearly seeing that Blastoise still had some psychological trauma from Jengar, and spoke up without hesitation. The reason I didn't respond to Blastoise's call earlier was to determine whether the Pokémon genuinely wanted to reconcile or was just pretending. If you promise to let these Wartortles leave and not attack us again, then I can promise to help you flip your body back up. It has to be said that the trick of taking advantage of others is useful everywhere, and it is also very useful in the face of temporary emotions. Blastoise, having received Jiang Ming's request, hesitated somewhat, seemingly unsure of what to do. Jiang Ming, who was the first to decide to shake hands and make peace, expressed to Blastoise his desire for the group of calamari to leave. Jiang Ming's condition was actually a bit risky since Blastoise could back out at any time. Jiang Ming didn't intend to give it too much time to hesitate. Seeing that it was becoming more and more hesitant and that it was hesitating for quite a long time, he immediately took the two Pokémon and retreated, making a gesture of leaving in front of the trainers around him. Sensing their gazes, Jiang Ming continued to look firmly at Blastoise. Just as Blastoise hesitated, Jiang Ming casually pushed out a grinning Jengar. Just as Blastoise was hesitating and unwilling, Jiang Ming spoke to Blastoise with a strange expression. Given the high likelihood of them backing out if they actually grant Blastoise the ability to move, they could very well face some significant dangers. Originally, Jiang Ming didn't plan to pay any attention to Blastoise after it was overturned. It was only because Song Jingli specifically summoned the Wartortle that Jiang Ming was forced to. The next step, of course, is for both sides to shake hands and make peace. So, right after Jiang Ming made that move, the group of trainers quickly left. After they all left, Jiang Ming placed Jengar and Gardevoir a few meters away from Blastoise and looked at Blastoise with a smile. "I'll only give you 1 hour. If you still hesitate after 1 hour, then I'll have to let my two Pokémon deal with you." Now he has retaliated and Blastoise has obediently stopped. With the promise of a return favor hanging in the air and the added pressure of coercion and enticement, Blastoise quickly looked sadly at Jiang Ming and made the gesture of agreement. "You must fulfill the conditions I've discussed with you, otherwise I have the ability to bring you back to your former glory and overthrow you again." Jiang Ming smiled with satisfaction after receiving the consent and did not intend to waste any more time. They have wasted too much time because of landing on the island. Although the good stuff here can be picked up by others at any time since they are the only people on the island right now. But Jiang Ming still didn't want to waste too much time on these things. Not wanting to waste any time, Jiang Ming calmly directed his Pokémon to start pulling the water arrow 300 Torterra. With Jiang Ming's actions, Blastoise was quickly turned back to its original position. Probably not expecting Jiang Ming to actually keep his word and seeing that Jiang Ming had actually pulled its body back, Blastoise let out a low roar. Just when Jiang Ming thought Blastoise wasn't going to keep its promise, the Blastoise that made the sound suddenly raised its head and stretched its neck towards the group of Wartortles not far away. It was unclear how the two sides were communicating. Jiang Ming only saw Blastoise emitting low growls. Before long, the group of Wartortles left one after another and returned to the forest. Jiang Ming, now on guard, silently put away the Piquet ball he had just taken out, quite satisfied with Blastoise's fulfillment of its promise. "I wish us a pleasant collaboration in the future." He casually said a few nice words to Blastoise and then left without hesitation with his Pokémon. Blastoise clearly had no interest in cooperating with Jiang Ming, and as soon as Jiang Ming left, Blastoise immediately returned to the water. After leaving, Jiang Ming made a point of turning around to check on Blastoise's situation. Seeing that the Pokémon didn't seem to be causing any more trouble, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. After finishing, Jiang Ming immediately headed towards where Zhang Tian was. Before any serious incidents occurred, Zhang Tian and the others were his teammates. With teammates by his side, he naturally had no need to act alone. Besides, with so many trainers not on his side, no one knew what they might do. Thinking about the possibility that the trainers might go too far, Jiang Ming's expression turned serious as he led a group of Pokémon and ran as fast as he could. Some time later, Jiang Ming arrived at Zhang Tian's location. He had expected to see Zhang Tian discussing things with other trainers when he arrived. Unexpectedly, when he arrived, he found an Onyx staring at a group of trainers. Upon seeing Jiang Ming's arrival, the giant rock snake immediately focused all its attention on him, eyeing him menacingly. Huo Ting reacted quickly and came to Jiang Ming's side, immediately explaining the situation of the Onyx. "This giant onion suddenly jumped out from underground when we were setting up our tents nearby. We didn't know what was going on, but it clearly regarded us as enemies." As he spoke, Huo Ting pointed to a small pit not far away. Just as Jiang Ming looked at the pit with a puzzled expression, Ding spoke to him thoughtfully. During our probing, it treated us as enemies and was very interested in what was in that pit. So before you arrived, we were discussing whether to go directly to find out what was in that pit. Their line of thinking wasn't fundamentally wrong. The Onyx's sudden attack, coupled with its inexplicable hostility, was indeed a bit strange. Under these strange circumstances, they naturally tried to find a way to investigate some clues about the giant Onyx. The things that Onyx cared about most became the focus of their investigation. In this gradual accumulation of attacks, Onyx slowly began to find itself increasingly overwhelmed. However, just as Jiang Ming was hesitating about whether to take this opportunity to sneak away, a cry of surprise came from not far away, followed by Zhang Tian's angry curse. Unfortunately, there's nothing that can be done now, isn't there? This kind of friendship formed halfway through life makes it impossible for them to give up any benefits. Hu Ting glanced irritably at the pit guarded by the Onyx, then couldn't help but whisper to Jiang Ming, who wasn't involved, "Why don't you sneak over there?" Unfortunately, Jiang Ming wasn't really that good, able to spot the flaw immediately. Jiang Ming, who had originally planned to sneak over, paused for a moment and almost immediately focused all his attention on Camille. What are these wartortles doing here? The other trainers, having witnessed Jiang Ming's previous ability against Blastoise, were somewhat hesitant now that they saw Jiang Ming had no particular interest in them. The trainers around who were attacking Onyx could see almost immediately that Onyx was struggling. Before long, one Pokémon after another emerged from the Piquet ball and began attacking Onyx. Hearing his uncertain question, Jiang Ming understood almost immediately that he was clearly worried that there might be a loophole in their plan. Helpless, Hu Ting could only look at Jiang Ming pitifully. Presumably because they had already agreed not to harm Jiang Ming, these wartortles did not attack him. Jiang Ming, who understood the trainer's plan, did not offer any solutions. Seeing that Onyx was starting to get tired, the trainers excitedly pulled out their second Pokémon. Onyx originally only had one Pokémon. Although this Pokémon was very strong in battle and could burrow underground, many Pokémon couldn't defeat it. If they had a normal opportunity to go there, they definitely wouldn't have chosen to let Jiang Ming reap such a benefit. However, while they were companions, they were only traveling together temporarily and didn't have a genuine friendship with Muraki. 014402422 Chinese letter 220,02420. However, before he could speak, the 22 Onyx in front of him suddenly launched an attack on the trainers around him. Under his gaze, the group of wartortles gradually emerged from the forest. But no matter what Two Fists can't fight for, although it dodged most of the attacks, quite a few still landed on Onyx. Jiang Ming, who hadn't participated at all, looked at their excited expressions and his gaze immediately fell on the small pit guarded by the giant Onyx. The trainers, who were waiting for Jiang Ming to make his statement, saw this and didn't dare to waste any more time. They quickly took out their Piquet balls and threw them at Onyx. The group of trainers, who originally wanted to finish the battle quickly, started to become increasingly frustrated as they got caught up in the entanglement. So even if he asked the question, Jiang Ming obviously couldn't answer it. However, they attack every Pokémon thrown out by the trainer equally, although Jiang Ming had indeed helped them before and was indeed their companion. So when there were no obstacles at the beginning, almost everyone was just trying to find ways to benefit themselves. One of the trainers couldn't help but ask Jiang Ming, "Do you sense any problems with this plan?" Unable to answer, Jiang Ming spread his hands. Despite their equal attacks and Onyx's assault, the trainers were not seriously injured, but you were entangled by the driver and blocked your way. Besides the trainers who were curious about what was in the pit guarded by Onyx, Jiang Ming was also quite curious. Seeing that these trainers were focusing their attention on Onyx, Jiang Ming was tempted to take this opportunity to go and see for himself. Jiang Ming, who was met with Huo Ting's gaze, actually had the same thought. Although his attention was drawn to the group of wartortles, Jiang Ming's focus remained on the pit guarded by Onyx. Fortunately, most trainers were currently being blocked by Cassiopeia and Onyx, which allowed Jiang Ming to pass through easily. With such a great opportunity, why wouldn't he take it? Just as he was looking forward to this great opportunity, the reservations next to him also presented him with it. Upon receiving this message, Jiang Ming hesitated for a moment, but naturally there was no need to refuse such a good opportunity at this time. So Jiang Ming nodded to Huo Ting without hesitation. Just as Huo Ting's eyes lit up, Jiang Ming quickly ran towards the pit not far away. The onyx naturally noticed Jiang Ming's movements. Seeing Jiang Ming running quickly towards the pit, the onyx immediately launched an attack on Jiang Ming. However, before the attack could land on Jiang Ming, a Gardevoir ran out and fired an attack at its tail. The onyx, suddenly attacked, had no ability to react at all. By the time he realized what was happening, Jiang Ming had already run around it and reached the side of the pit. Unexpectedly, Jiang Ming was so fast that the onyx went berserk and began to launch one attack after another towards him in a fit of rage. Unfortunately, the two elves beside Jiang Ming were never simple elves. Since they are the trainers they protect, they will absolutely not allow other Pokémon to approach their trainers at will. So just as Onyx was angrily launching a deadly attack on Jiang Ming, Jengar and Gardevoir jumped to Jiang Ming's side almost without hesitation and firmly blocked Onyx's attack. Using the two Pokémon as cover, Jiang Ming quickly arrived at the edge of the pit and looked down. Upon seeing what was below, Jiang Ming's expression immediately turned to surprise. At the same time, the trainers who had been rescued from Onyx's attack quickly came to Jiang Ming's side. The group of trainers, who had originally planned to share the contents of the pit with Jiang Ming if they found something of value, suddenly looked down and saw several golden eggs lying at the bottom of the pit. Those eggs didn't look like elf eggs, but they looked very valuable. Besides being valuable, these eggs also contain an indescribable power. Many elves felt attracted the moment they got close to the eggs and tried to scoop them up. The trainers, who had no idea what these eggs were, looked serious and almost immediately realized that although they didn't know what they were definitely something good. Since they already clearly know it's a good thing, they certainly won't give it away so easily. The group of trainers who had originally planned to discuss the matter exchanged glances and acted first. 14,402,422, Feilu 220,012,100. Jiang Ming spotted the mask at a glance, so how could he let these trainers snatch it away so easily? Jiang Ming's eyes turned cold upon sensing the trainers' actions, and he quickly dug down into the pit as well. With Jiang Ming's help, he successfully retrieved an egg. Meanwhile, the other trainers started stealing other eggs. Although there weren't a particularly small number of eggs at the bottom of the pit, the sheer number of trainers meant that the golden eggs, Cayenne Zhao's, couldn't be evenly distributed, leading to a huge conflict. Besides the conflict, the giant onyx next to them also became extremely agitated after seeing that they had taken away its collection. Jiang Ming, who could almost sense that the atmosphere around him was starting to get strange, looked at the trainer's actions with mixed feelings, then glanced at Onyx's movements, and decided not to waste too much time here. He's already got a golden egg, there's no need to be too greedy. It would be better to run away quickly while those trainers aren't paying attention. Having decided to run away, Jiang Ming turned to Jengar and Gardevoir, who were still dealing with Onyx, and said directly, "Let's go." The two Pokémon were always very good at understanding their trainer's language. Almost at the same time Jiang Ming said those words, the two Pokémon who were helping the trainers fight off Onyx quickly ran to Jiang Ming's side. The trainers who were scrambling for the golden egg had no idea that Jiang Ming would run away so suddenly. Seeing that Jiang Ming had turned and run away, and that his Pokémon didn't intend to stay and defend against them, the trainers had no choice but to start using their own methods to both fend off the Onyx's attacks and try to steal things. While they were working themselves to the bone, Jiang Ming quickly found a new place and secretly hid the golden egg. After all, this item has been fought over by so many trainers. If it remains with him, even with what he said at the beginning, these trainers might still try to take it. This is not a good thing for him. It's better to hide it first and talk about it when it's time to leave. Having confirmed the situation, Jiang Ming carefully hid the items in the marked location and then led the other Pokémon away in another direction. After running for a while, Jiang Ming stopped. Just then, a series of noises suddenly came from behind. Jiang Ming, who had just stopped, was a little surprised. He hadn't expected that the trainers would catch up so quickly. He looked seriously at the group of trainers chasing after him, secretly made a Poké Ball and planned to use Lucario to harass them if they really came over. Then, taking advantage of the moment when the trainers didn't react, they used the powerful attacks of Jengar and Gardevoir to send the trainers away. Jiang Ming, who had planned everything perfectly, stared coldly ahead. He never expected that what appeared before him was not one of the trainers trying to take his things, but rather a big-tongued guy with a golden egg curled up in front of him. Lickitung was probably not expected to see a trainer here and was so frightened that it hurriedly ran away, turning around and running in another direction. The group of trainers who had been chasing after Lickitung were furious when they saw him turn and run away. Jiang Ming glanced at the group of trainers strangely, then blankly searched for Zhang Tian among them. What's going on? He didn't seem to have a lisp when he first started running. How did a giant tongue suddenly appear halfway through the race and get caught in the golden egg? Thinking of Lickitung's tongue, which was truly indescribable, Jiang Ming silently looked at the group of trainers in front of him with sympathy. Under Jiang Ming's sympathetic gaze, a group of trainers who had failed to catch up with Lickitung stopped one after another. One of the trainers had a ferocious expression and spoke angrily with great displeasure. This big tongue had been hiding nearby, but because our attention was on the golden egg, we didn't notice it. Just when we were about to defeat the Onyx and get the golden egg, this Pokémon suddenly stuck out a tongue from the tree and snatched the golden egg away. Perhaps recalling some of Lipton's actions, the group of trainers looked particularly grim, with the trainer who had spoken earlier exclaiming how unlucky he was. Zhang Tian's expression wasn't very good either. After all, the first treasure he saw upon arriving on this island had been snatched away by an elf. Thinking about how hard he had worked to steal Zhang Tian's property, he felt like he had lost out big time. Feeling a bit cheated, Zhang Tian glanced at Jiang Ming silently, having expected Jiang Ming to have a gold mask on him. To his surprise, Jiang Ming's backpack looked exactly the same as when he arrived. There wasn't a single clue whatsoever about the gold mine. Zhang Tian, who had been keeping his gaze on Jiang Ming, raised an eyebrow slightly upon seeing this. 14,402,422, Feilu 220,012,330. They quickly realized that Jiang Ming had devised a way to hide the golden egg. He chuckled, then, thinking of Jiang Ming's abilities and the Jengar and Gardevoir around him, he ultimately said nothing. After all, he might not be able to defeat the two elves beside Jiang Ming, so he shouldn't make a fool of himself.
Hello, everyone! As we wrap up this video, I want to share a quick note. I have a Patreon account. If you'd like to support me and enjoy on-demand audiobooks, you can become a Patreon member. Alternatively, you can check out my Google Drive link, which has 500-plus novel audiobooks available through my Ko-fi or Patreon shop. I appreciate your support.